Is this a different?
We are turning our house speakers on. House speakers are going on. Are we on? I'm doing a sound check from the chambers here for anybody joining us on Teams. Can someone please unmute and sound off so I can do that sound check? Anybody available on Teams? If you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Good morning. Let's go. Did you find the art committee interesting?
Yeah, I just like trying to do that.
It's an interesting group. Because, you know, the way and they're not.
Commissioner Hasegawa is not virtual as of yet. I'm not sure about Commissioner
Now it's too quickly.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Commission President Hamdi Mohammed convening the regular meeting of November 19, 2024. The time is now 12:04 p.m. We're meeting in person today at the Sea-Tac Conference Center and virtually on Microsoft Teams. Clerk Hart, please call the roll for commissioners in attendance.
Thank you. Commissioner Calkins.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Toe will be here shortly. He is in the building, and I expect him in the meeting room anytime. Commissioner Felleman?
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Hasegawa will be joining us later virtually. She is not currently on. And then Commissioner Mohammed.
Present.
Thank you. We do have a quorum established.
Very good. A few housekeeping items before we begin. For everyone in the meeting room today, please turn your cell phones to silent. For anyone participating on Microsoft Teams, please mute your speakers when not actively speaking or presenting. Please keep your cameras off unless you are a member of the commission or the executive director participating virtually, or you are a member of the staff in presentation mode and addressing the commission. Members of the public addressing the commission during public comment may turn on their cameras when their names are called and will turn them back off again at the conclusion of their remarks. For everyone at the dais, please turn off the speakers on any computers and silence your devices. Please also remember to address your request to be recognized to speak through the chair, and wait to speak until you have been recognized. You'll turn your microphones on and off as needed. All of the items noted here will ensure that we have a smoother meeting. Thank you. All votes casted will be taken by the roll call method or by general consent. So it is clear for anyone participating virtually how votes are casted. Commissioners will say aye or nay when their names are called. We are meeting on the ancestral lands and waters of the Coast Salish people, with whom we share a commitment to steward these natural resources for future generations. This meeting is being digitally recorded and may be viewed or heard at any time on our port site and may be rebroadcasted by King County Television. Please now stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. The first item of business today is approval of the agenda. As a reminder, if a commissioner wishes to make a general comment for or against an item on the consent agenda, it is not necessary to pull the item from the consent agenda. Rather, a commissioner may offer general supporting or opposing comments later in this meeting, once we get to that part of the agenda. However, it is now appropriate at this time, if a commissioner wants to ask questions of staff or wishes to have a dialogue on the consent agenda, to request the item be pulled for a separate discussion. I'll note at this time that Commissioner Hasagawa has asked that item number 8E on the consent agenda be removed for consideration today and moved to the December 18th meeting. Are there any items to be pulled from the consent agenda or any motions to rearrange the order of the day?
Madam Commission President, just to note there, that's December 10th.
December 10th.
No, 10E.
No, it's 8E on here.
Yes, the meeting date to postpone it to is December 10th.
Oh, to December 10th.
Yes.
Okay. The item that is being moved is 8E, and it's being moved to the meeting on December 10th, 2024, commission meeting. Are there any items to be pulled from the consent agenda or any motions to rearrange the order of the day? Or any objections to reschedule item 8E to the December 10th meeting as requested by Commissioner Hasagawa? Commissioners? Okay, hearing none. Commissioners, the question is now on approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Commissioner Fellman?
So moved.
I'll second.
Wonderful. The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any objection to approve the agenda as amended? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as amended. Thank you all. Next on our agenda is the Executive Director report. Executive Director Metrick, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Madam President, Commissioners. Welcome to the second meeting in November and 1 week apart. Our condensed meeting schedule in November means we will not be here again in public session until December 10th, that meeting. I'd like to take this time to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and a happy Native American Heritage Day. It feels more like fall or winter here today. We are finally seeing snow in the mountains and hills around Seattle again. And we're also getting our first major blast of extreme weather with the upcoming bomb cyclone that is expected to hit our area later this evening with heavy rains and strong winds. And it really is geographically, depending where you are, the winds will be stronger than others. Since yesterday, our operational leaders have been issuing preparedness reminders as we work to ensure safe, continuous operations throughout all of our facilities. I also want to remind staff in the community to take precautions at home as well to prepare for potential electrical outages and to avoid outside activities if you can during this weather event. Turning now to matters more within our control, I'd like to begin my remarks by recognizing the accounting and financial reporting AFR department for earning the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting from the Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada, and for the port's annual comprehensive financial report published in 2024 for 2023. This is the 19th consecutive year the team has received this honor, and this level of excellence for this team was in full display in the last several weeks as they managed a manual process for payroll for our entire workforce due to the ongoing cyber incident. This reflects very well on our Century Agenda goal of being a highly effective public agency. Congratulations again to Lisa Lamb and everyone within AFR and their partners throughout the divisions of the port. I have a few updates to share regarding operations and projects here at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. As you can imagine, we are gearing up for the holiday travel season. It's right around the corner, which we expect to be very busy. As a matter of fact, I heard reports nationwide travel on Thanksgiving may set a record. In fact, forecasts show that we should serve 1.5 million passengers at our airport between November 21st and the 30th. For our airport, summer is always the busiest season, so we should not expect to break records, but the daily passenger counts coming in the next week are high, especially the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. One major change travelers should be aware of is the full closure of Checkpoint 5, which is necessary as we enter into the second phase of the SCA Gateway project. We prepared for this moment earlier this year by adding lanes to checkpoints 2 and 3, which were very successful. Over 90% of travelers went through security in less than 30 minutes. As you know, we will open an entirely new Checkpoint 1 on the south end of the baggage claim in early 2025, so additional resources are coming. On the bright side, and literally on the bright side, we have removed the construction barriers coming down in the north end of the airport, and the new Alaska Airlines stations for checking and dropping off baggage opened on the mezzanine level for travelers coming across the sky bridges. These projects are critical to maintaining safe and efficient operations with the demand we have for services today. But we're also planning for the future. We are also approximately halfway through the 52-day public comment period for the airport's Sustainable Airport Master Plan, or SAMP. Related to that, under the National Environmental Policy Act draft, that is the comment period for the National Environmental Policy Act draft environmental assessment. We've had several open houses last week, and I had the opportunity to attend the open house in Burien last Thursday. I was impressed with the information provided at each station and the public participation. Just over 250 people signed in at 4 open houses, including local elected officials and START community representatives. In upcoming engagement, in the next week, we will brief the Highline Forum, the Puget Sound Regional Council Staff Committee, and the Sea-Tac City Council, and the Regional South King County Regional Transportation Board. The public has until December 13th to submit their comments. Our website provides the details and options for submitting formal comments on the NEPA draft environmental assessment. Moving to today's commission meeting, I'd like to highlight a few items. Today, we'll seek your adoption of the 2025 budget as well as the salary and benefits resolution. Both of these items are the culmination of months of hard work by our budgeting and human resources teams. The new modernized compensation program provides transparency and consistency in how salaries are determined for non-represented employees at the port. On our consent agenda today, we're seeking design authorization for our flight corridor safety program. This action enables an evaluation and mitigation of obstructions in the vicinity of the airport to ensure compliance with FAA regulations. This will be done in compliance with the port's land stewardship policy, and we expect to come back with additional details during construction authorization in the second quarter of next year. Also on the consent agenda today, we have a lease agreement with Maritime Blue to be the sole tenant in the new Maritime Innovation Center at Fisherman's Terminal. This marks the culmination of many years of planning to utilize the new Maritime Innovation Center as a permanent facility for driving economic growth in the Blue economy. Under new business, we have additional items related to our ongoing partnership with Maritime Blue. Also under new business is a commission order regarding transportation tactics and our SCA Moves program. I support this order and appreciate the efforts from our airport operations, external relations, and legal team and commission office, as well as you, commissioners, for getting us to this point. Finally, under staff presentations and reports, you'll hear from our State Government Relations Manager, John Flanagan, on our proposed state legislative agenda and priorities for the 2025 legislative session. Commissioners, that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director Metrick, for those important updates and information. Commissioners, are there any questions for Mr. Metrick? All right, we are now at the committee report. Erica Chung, Strategic Advisor, will provide that report out. Erica, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, President Mohammed, Commissioners, Executive Director Metrick. I have one committee report for you today. The Port-Wide Arts and Cultural Board met on November 18th with Commissioner Solomon and Mohammed in attendance. Topics for the meeting included a briefing on the City of Seattle's current plans on the Paragon sculpture at Terminal 107 Park, a proposed project to add artwork to dock stub station at Shoshoa Bay Marina, and a briefing on the progress made to add artwork to Pier 66 shore power boxes. The art board also heard from Tommy Gregory, Aviation Art Program Manager, regarding a consulting contract to provide support for the Port's Public Art Program, and the board offered recommendations on the scope of work for the consultant. This concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica, for those updates. Are there any follow-up questions regarding committees? Commissioners? Hearing none, thank you, Erica, again. Moving us along, we are now at the public comment section. The Port of Seattle welcomes public comments as an important part of the public process. Comments are received and considered by the Commission in its deliberations. Before we take public comment, let's review our rules for in-person and virtual public comment. Clerk Hart, please play the recording.
The Port of Seattle Commission welcomes you to our meeting today. As noted, public comment is an important part of the public process, and the Port of Seattle Commission thanks you for joining us. Before proceeding, we will overview the rules governing public comment for your general information. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak unless otherwise revised by the presiding officer for the purposes of meeting efficiency, and the speaker shall keep their remarks within the allotted time provided. A timer will appear on the screen, and a buzzer will sound at the end of the speaker's comment period. The Commission accepts comments on items appearing on its agenda and items related to the conduct of port business. The presiding officer will ask speakers to limit their comments to these topics. This rule applies to both introductory and concluding remarks. Disruptions of Commission public meetings are prohibited. General disruptions include, but are not limited to, the following: speaking before being recognized by the presiding officer, holding or placing banners and signs in the meeting room in a way that endangers others or obstructs the flow of people or view of others at the meeting, intentionally disrupting, disturbing, or otherwise impeding attendance or participation at a meeting, refusing to follow the direction of the presiding officer or security personnel, attempting to use the comment time for purposeful delay without conveying a discernible message, using the comment period to assist in a campaign for election of any person to any office or for the promotion of or opposition to any ballot proposition except when addressing action being taken by the Commission on a ballot proposition appearing on its agenda, directing public comments to the audience, engaging in abusive or harassing behavior, including but not limited to derogatory remarks based on age, race, color, national origin, ancestry, religion, disability, pregnancy, sex, gender, sexual orientation, transgender status, marital status, or any other category protected by law, the use of obscene or profane language and gestures, assaults or other threatening behavior, and sexual misconduct or sexual harassment. For safety purposes, individuals are asked not to physically approach commissioners or staff at the meeting table during the meeting. Individuals may provide written public comment before or after the meeting, and in addition, speakers may offer written materials to the Commission clerk for distribution during their testimony to the Commission. A detailed list of the public comment rules is available through the Commission clerk. If a meeting is disrupted by an individual in attendance in the meeting room or by an individual providing public comment in person or virtually, the port will impose progressive consequences.
Sounds like
In today's meeting
Okay,
record,
he's back.
the clerk has a list of those prepared to speak. When your name is called, please come to the testimony table or unmute yourself if joining virtually. Repeat your name for the record and state your topic related to an item on the agenda or related to the conduct of port business. For those joining virtually, when you have concluded your remarks, please turn off your camera and mute your microphone. Our public comment period will now commence. Thank you again for joining us today.
All right, I have 3 sign-ups, and I'll call the first speaker. I have Dan R. Welcome.
Welcome to Verizon Wireless. Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again.
Yes, I've been trying to communicate with the board, and that's not too good. Our 2 phones on the website are disconnected. That's scary because people can't communicate with the board, and I hate to say that many people will laugh at it. I'm here with a memory to share. Picking up my granddaughter returning from the first conference with a major medical company, and this was a great airport. Picking her up, circling around the garage with all the other cars spewing exhaust and fumes out because of those parking guides are totally inaccurate. There's not parking where those are. And that concerns me. We're all go green. And I realize I don't know if it's because the system was crashed and they haven't fixed it or they're not aware of it. But I think you boards need to look at it to say, hey, we got to do a better job at this. Parking, I have a solution right now. Parking along the road, that was closed off. Cars are spinning around. I understand there's major construction for more parking, but that's going to take 10, 20 years to do. Let's consider opening up parking along the roadway again, and it can be done. It took 5 years to get the legislature to approve it on 405 North, so it can be done. We definitely need a new airport, and I don't think anyone's here against that and say, hey, we don't want any competition. Here's something I think we need to consider is we need a strong governor to appoint a committee, and I think it's Jay Inslee to do that before he leaves the office. Our new governor, I don't think, can get an airport built here. Who knows? Do you know anyone who Cy Porter is? He's a TikTok avid, goes around and inspects new homes, and he always finds things wrong. When there's plumbing doesn't work, the heating's not hooked up, walls fall down, and they tried to take him to court and get his license taken away from him. The board could not do it. So what they did was they sent a letter of concern to him, and I think that would be a good idea for the board to send a letter of concern to Jay Inslee saying, hey, can you get a board for the new airport set up before you leave office? And I'd be willing to help you out with that, even to send Jay Inslee a letter of concern. We need a new airport, and I think that would help make this a better airport.
Thank you, Dan, for your comments. I'll ask one of our commission staff if they could follow up with you, especially I'm not sure what number you're calling, but if someone can follow up with you to make sure that we identify that number.
I think it would be good. I'm wanting to help this make a better airport, and I hope I'll work on drafting a letter to the governor and bring it to the next meeting, and we'll get it out in the mail.
Thank you.
Dan, if you could please leave your information with Mary Cruz so we can make sure someone can contact you. Okay?
That's great, because you've gotten other messages too, and that's great. You have to answer now.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will now call our next speaker. I have Sandy Hunt on from Defenders of Highline Forest. Welcome, Sandy.
I'm going to try this microphone.
If Sandy, just don't be so close.
Don't be
it
too
won't
close. All right. How's that?
Perfect.
Good.
All right. Greetings, commissioners. I'm Sandy Hunt, and I'm a defender of Highline Forest, and we have dedicated ourselves to environmental justice around Sea-Tac Airport. a region and community that is at risk and often struggles to make their voices heard against developments being proposed, like the Des Moines Creek Business Park West. The lease agreement should never have been made. Those responsible for leasing this land for warehouse development must face the community and should explain their actions. We strongly urge the Commission to revisit this lease and explore options to either reverse it or significantly reduce its footprint to the southern part of the property. If you do nothing, the development will directly result in the loss of protective tree canopy and other problems that exacerbate residents' health problems. These residents who live really directly under the flight path south of the airport already endure poor air quality and excessive noise. By adding another massive warehouse directly behind their homes, we are ignoring their plight. The defenders have provided links to the evidence used in the neighbor's appeal and strongly encourage you to review it once you're able to access it. Our examination of the studies, the MDNS studies supporting it, show a disheartening lack of effort to acknowledge, let alone measure, the community's current benefits from living next to a natural tree-covered parcel of land. The MDNS failed to collect essential data about the tree-covered trails, which are invaluable to the community. SEPA law requires genuine efforts to gather and analyze relevant data to ensure environmental considerations are factored into the city's decision-making process. The land, which has served as a recreational space for decades, is now slated to become another massive warehouse, bringing thousands of weekly truck trips and car trips, increasing noise and further polluting this neighborhood. This degradation of air quality and increase in noise is unacceptable. Please consider the moral implications of further burdening these vulnerable residents. We must protect our neighbors and their environment from harmful developments. It's time to think outside the box and reverse this lease. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy, for your comments. Next I have on my list is Andrea. Welcome.
Hello,
Hi.
I'm also with Defenders of Highline Forest, continuing Sandy's theme. Defenders of Highline Forest focus on the crucial role trees play in our communities, particularly around Sea-Tac Airport. Today, we strongly urge the Commission to revisit the lease agreement for the Des Moines Creek West Business Park and consider either reversing it or significantly reducing its footprint. This is the right thing to do because SEPA law stipulates that a development's location must be considered. So why is the location of this property so important to so many? Number one, it is located directly under the Sea-Tac flight path, posing harmful noise and air quality issues that were not measured in the MDNS. When the city rezoned it from residential to business park, it removed a buffer between the homes and the business parks to the east, affecting their health and property values. That was number two. Number three, a county erosion and landslide hazards area is in the ravine 40 feet directly to the north. Yet almost all of the trees are being removed at the edge of the property with no contour mapping of the creek or ravine having been done. 4, it is also District 54's wellhead protection area, requiring a careful consideration of water quality and quantity impacts. 5, the MDNS ignores city code by not measuring potential noise impacts in Des Moines Creek Park, a city park of significance. 6, it is a priority habitats and species area and serves as the last green link in the trail system in this part of the county. 7, additional development is underway with the Highway 509 extension, a new off-ramp, and expanding air traffic, all of which exacerbate noise and pollution. In conclusion, the cumulative impacts and sensitive environmental context of this development demand a full reassessment. We urge you to consider the profound implications of this development on lives in the community and do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. That concludes the signups for today. Is there anyone else present on Teams or present in the room today who did not sign up but wishes to address the commission at this time? Hearing none, I'll move us along. Clerk Hart, are there any, could you provide a synopsis of any written comments that we may have received?
Thank you, Madam Commission President, members of the Commission, Executive Director Metric. We received one written comment today, also submitted by Sandy Hunt, who is present in the room. She submits documentation to the Port of Seattle regarding the Des Moines Creek Business Park West project and its mitigated determination of non-significance, and asked the port to direct its leasing agents to submit its SEPA determination and checklist along with all other documents related to SEPA determinations currently housed within jurisdictions where the Port of Seattle develops its property. And that concludes our written comments received for the meeting today.
Thank you, Clerk Hart. Hearing no further public testimony, we'll now move on to the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are considered routine and will be adopted by one motion. Items removed from the consent agenda will be considered separately immediately after adoption of the remaining consent agenda items. Commissioner Cho, I understand that you have a couple of items you want to speak to?
Actually, it pertains to 10A on new business, so I think I'm okay with the consent agenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
Clerk Hart?
Madam Commission President, Commissioner Cho and Mr. Ramos, so 8G, 10A, and
Oh,
10B.
yes, you're right.
The Maritime Blue.
Yes.
Okay, actually, can I move to parse out the consent agenda so that we're voting on items 8A through F, so I can recuse myself on 8G as a ex officio board member of the Maritime Blue Accelerator. I think it's appropriate for me to recuse myself on that one.
Got it. And Commissioner Cho and I just had a conversation about this. For remote interest of this nature, the Code of Ethics for commissioners provide that you can remain in the meeting room by not advocating for passage or debate on the matters. You may vote, but your vote will not be counted on these items. But Commissioner Cho prefers to recuse himself from these items, and that's items 8G, 8G, 10A, and 10B.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and not count his vote for consent then.
Okay.
Or we'll pull the item from the consent agenda. How do we want to do this?
Can we take the votes in two blocks?
We can?
Okay.
So we'll pull it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wonderful. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items covering 8A, 8B, 8C, 8D, 8F.
Yep, that's it.
That's all.
So moved.
I'll second.
Wonderful. Commissioners, please say aye or nay when your names are called. Clerk Hart.
Thank you. Beginning with Commissioner Calkins.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Cho.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Felleman.
Aye.
Thank you. I'm not sure Commissioner Hoskowa is on our line yet. And not seeing her. Commissioner Mohammed.
Aye.
Thank you. 4 ayes, 0 nays for this item.
Great. The motion passes.
And then,
So
Madam
we'll
Commissioner.
consider-
Yep, go ahead.
Wonderful. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion to approve item number 8G.
And would you like me to read that into the record?
Please do. Thank you.
Thank you. This is item 8G, authorization for the executive director to execute. So Commissioner Cho, are you wanting to leave the room?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're actually going to kick me out. Okay.
You don't have to.
No. It makes sense.
Okay.
I'll take a walk.
It's his preference, so great.
Thank you. So item 8G, authorization for the executive director to execute a term lease with Washington Marine Blue for approximately 15,700 gross square feet of space located within at Fisherman's Terminal within the Maritime Innovation Center.
Great. Thank you, Clerk Hart, for reading that into the record. Is there a motion and a second?
So moved. Can I ask a question? Is that okay or no?
Sure.
I was just wondering, what percentage of the building is that?
A question for staff.
Yeah.
Do we,
Is there someone
I
available
believe
to
it's
speak to this?
100%.
100%.
100% of the
That's what I
building.
thought.
Great.
So you moved it? Second.
Great. The motion has been made and seconded. Clerk Hart, please call the roll.
One moment. Thank you. Commissioner Calkins.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Fellman.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Hasagawa. Commissioner Mohammed.
Aye.
Thank you. 3 ayes, 0 nays for this item.
Very good. The motion passes. Could someone let Commissioner Cho know that we've moved on from this?
Items 10A and 10B are next.
He's also recused from those items.
Correct.
Okay, let's pause for a second.
Okay.
Okay, moving on in the agenda, we have 5 new business items. Items number 10A and 10B will be consolidated into one presentation and motion, as will items 10C and 10D. Clerk Hart, please read the first item into the record, and then Executive Metric will introduce the item.
Thank you. This is item 10A, authorization for the executive director to execute a memorandum of understanding with Maritime Blue, a Washington 501c6 nonprofit organization surrounding operation and Port of Seattle's participation in Maritime Blue's strategic alliance, and also including item 10B, authorization for the executive director to execute a partnership agreement with Maritime Blue, a nonprofit agency, to advance economic efforts by contracting for the continuation of a Maritime Blue Ventures program, including an accelerator and incubator program at Fisherman's Terminal, and facilitating the Blue Wind Collaborative to activate the region's developing floating offshore wind supply chain in the requested amount of $360,000.
Commissioners, this action enables us to continue our participation in this strategic alliance aimed at advancing regional efforts in the blue economy. The alliance representation from industry, ports, tribes, labor, nonprofits, and research institutions. Together, we will work to promote economic development, sustainability, maritime, marine conservation, and workforce development initiatives. Following this presentation, we'll also seek your approval of a partnership agreement authorization that supports the Maritime Blue Innovation Accelerator, Maritime Business Incubator, and the Blue Wind Collaborative. Presenters this afternoon are Kara Leese, Director of Real Estate Development and Economic Development, Annie Tran, Economic Development Manager, and Joshua Berger, President and CEO of Washington Maritime Blue. So I think we're going to begin with Kara Leese.
Thank you, Director Metric, and good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm pleased to introduce this set of topics to reauthorize our relationship with the Maritime Blue and its collaboration with the Port of Seattle on several significant issues that bring new ingenuity, power, and modernity to our maritime enterprise creation and economic development. Today, you'll largely be hearing from Joshua Berger, Executive Director of Maritime Blue, who will recap our present relationship and the good work that's been proceeding in the partnership with Maritime Blue for the last 5 years. Our first authorization of an MOU was in 2019, and we've had an ever-engaging and ever-expanding relationship ever since. Earlier, we asked for your authorization on the consent agenda for a real milestone. I just want to represent here as well the lease with the Maritime Blue team to be the tenant at the Maritime Innovation Center, which is currently under construction. So I also want to acknowledge Annie Tran, our managing partner on this project with EDD, since losing our managing director, Dave McFadden, who really was the steward of our Maritime Blue relationship over these years before his retirement back in August. So today we'll be talking for authorization on the MOU. Then I will have Josh do a presentation on the work that's been going on between us, followed by the authorization for a new contract. It will not be the last time you will be asked for authorization for new contracts with Maritime Blue starting in next year. There are a couple of projects that I'm sure you will mention in your presentation and remarks with our stewardship of our maritime environmental team as well. So lots going on with Maritime Blue. Next slide, please. Our first request is the authorization to execute a memorandum of understanding to the Washington State nonprofit organization Maritime Blue to propel our Pacific Northwest Global Innovation Hub for the Blue Economy and ocean-based climate solutions through its many programs. This is the basic template of our relationship with Maritime Blue and allows us to offer additional contracting over the 2 years represented by the memorandum. Next slide, please. I'm now going to turn this over to Joshua Berger, who will give an outline. I know he's got a lot of his talent with him today and will be available for questions, obviously, later. So, Josh, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Commissioners and Executive Director Metric. I think you're absolutely right. The majority of my talent is behind us. External to myself, is always the case for a sustainable long-term organization. Thrilled to be with you here this afternoon. Appreciate taking the time on the consent agenda and the authorization of our MOU and our continued partnership and work together. I'm going to spend sort of most of the time looking forward. We've come each year. It's been a little bit more than a year now that we've given you an update on all the various different programs and activities and alliances and work that's been happening in partnership, certainly with the Port of Seattle, across the state, across the region, really across the globe. I wanted to be a little bit more forward-facing in what's ahead of us. Our organization is now past the 5-year adolescent threshold, maybe. Maybe we're just moving into our later adolescence years as we're growing up as an organization and having continued impact together. Maybe next slide, this, an overview of who we are and the various folks in which we're engaged with on an ongoing basis. Our membership as an organization continues to grow. And as you see, it continues to reflect our core innovation cluster model, which is the collaboration really just being a catalyst of our members, which represent industry partners from some of the largest global organizations in the world, to one-person engineering shops, research institutions, ports, cities, municipalities, agencies, and NGOs and community-based organizations. Next slide, please. And this is really where the core of our work is. These are our strategic areas of focus. And we've aligned them in the MOU to many of the different programs and strategic areas of focus of the Port of Seattle, and many others across the region. In any given day, we're talking about digitalization, renewable ocean energy, sustainable fishing, decarbonization, really across the board. And this is sort of our North Star of the work that our members and our partners are working on. Next slide, please. This is an iteration of how we see the breadth of the work coming together. You all have asked me lots of questions, and staff have asked lots of questions about sort of these vertical thrusts of the work that we're doing. And we're really taking a concerted effort to really understand how our various different programs, the horizontal areas, are affecting that North Star, our vision, and our 5 strategic areas of focus. Where all of that work, whether we're convening members around a core market opportunity like offshore wind supply chain development, we're looking for the latest innovation in these key markets, we're thinking about the workforce of the future, and we're convening and knowledge sharing across these areas. They're really in service to that larger mission in these strategic areas of focus. Next slide, please.
I just tried logging in.
And the various programs in which we provide that activity. And
I'm sorry, I think somebody's coming in hot from online.
thank you.
Please proceed, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Next slide, please. We'll start, folks, with our joint innovation programs. And this is really where we are convening at the highest levels. This is where we're creating new markets, understanding the challenges, understanding where our focus should be in analysis or first-of-kind demonstration projects. It's really the core of the collaborative nature of the work. Next slide, please. And over the last few years, the Port of Seattle and many others have been deeply engaged in these formal collaboratives, these formal leadership structures that's really driving the work around these new markets and challenges. Our Quiet Sound, really the most mature of these programs, very much spurred by the Port of Seattle and our activity and support across collaborative partners there, and the ongoing growth of the Blue Wind Supply Chain Collaborative. Looking into the future, next slide, please. These growing initiatives and collaboratives is where we're putting a lot of energy right now. We've had the entire breadth of the seaweed farming community that's here in the Salish Sea, wanting to understand how they collaboratively look towards processing techniques and what the markets of the future for that growing opportunity around commercial viability of seaweed and kelp harvesting in the region. The Blue Edge Network, where we operators are creating the first of kind in the world innovation lab for startup ventures across the region, and the Sustainable Maritime Fuels Collaborative. And we've been at work with the Port of Seattle, Seaport Alliance, and a number of others in understanding what the structure looks like for that work going forward, and we're excited to announce in this coming year as we continue to formalize, and have appreciated the Port of Seattle's ongoing support and commitment to help us facilitate through this process, define the collaborative decision-making structure, and start to move forward on that work. Next slide, please. Our Blue Ventures team is where we're supporting founders at all different stages and scales. Next slide. The existing programs started from one, which we had the first kickoff. I don't know if you remember, was the day we heard about the first COVID case in the United States at Pier 69, getting the briefing from the governor that morning, and it changed the world dramatically. What it did not change was significant interest, effort, and growth in scaling innovation from the earliest stages really around the globe. So what started as an experiment of the first, really the first in the nation, Ocean Maritime Dedicated Accelerator Program right here in partnership with the Port of Seattle has expanded to multiple programs supporting founders at all scales, all levels, and every stage of their journey. We have the dedicated Seattle Innovation Incubator for the earliest stage companies, the accelerator that's supporting directly venture scale, high growth potential companies, and then One Ocean Accelerator, I know Commissioner Cho has left the room, that spurred from a conversation with Commissioner Cho thinking about how do we support international companies who are later stage and ready for US markets and do that in a dedicated way. Next slide. We've now supported almost 70 startups across those multiple different programs. Next slide. And seen really significant impact. Multiple startups, significant dollars are being raised. We're creating jobs across this region, and we're doing it in a way that reflects our goals for diversity, equity, inclusion in this space and all the work that we do. Next slide, please. And we're now at the point where we're ready to start bringing direct investment to the companies that are entering our accelerator program. It's being done in partnership with the Blue Innovation Fund and Meliorate Partners, where now those companies that are selected as high growth companies get direct investment as tied to their inclusion in our accelerator program. This brings us to the point where we are now recognized as one of the leading places to come in the globe if you are looking to scale your blue economy. We tell the story of going to Rotterdam and meeting the Seattle-based two women founders building technology when we first started, felt they had to go to Rotterdam to go get support. Now folks from around the globe are coming directly to Seattle. And this investment brings that a long way. It attracts the next level founders and with the rest of our programs creates infrastructure to support a pipeline of new founders through that work. Next slide, please. Our equity engagement team has significant support from the Port of Seattle and incredible partnership as we grow the work of the Youth Maritime Career Launch Program, which started as a supported program by the Port of Seattle, the Youth Maritime Collaborative, really starting to think, you all have been in the room with me for more than a decade, many of you, for more than a decade, thinking about the challenges that we face workforce across maritime and oceans. That challenge takes a significant amount of work and intention. And so we have built programs to intentionally bring together the workforce system and create more accessible pathways through a continuum of programs. Next slide, please. I may have missed a slide, but that's all right. Between the work we're doing for early awareness through our sort of what we call internship light program over the summers for high school students, and now with the growth of the Youth Maritime Career Launch Program, we've supported more than 70 interns, provided stipends, and more than that, we're connecting communities across our region, particularly around South King County, directly to employers, and supporting employers through that journey as well. Next slide. this is what is sort of the growth, and we have been grateful to be so close with the partnership with the Port of Seattle as we're looking at, as we continue to scale the impacts of the Youth Maritime Career Launch Program. What we've recognized over the last couple of years as we built this is that youth need a little bit deeper training to have the most successful 3-month internship program as possible. And so with support from the Port of Seattle and many others across the region, really as far away as Australia for these programs, is what we're doing is we're investing deeper into the training, moving from a 1-month training before their 1-week training before their 3-month internship, and turning into a summer-long training program, so they get all the support and skills, whether it's OSHA training or STCW training, so that they're ready for the most successful 3-month internship. The next stage of this is engaging with employers more deeply. It's not just about supporting youth to jump over barriers. It's about removing barriers at the employer level. And this takes more intentional work directly with employers. And so we're investing a significant amount of our time and capacity to having custom training programs across our employer base to have employers ready to connect that whole system. Next slide, please. And our Blue Hub. It's both literal and figurative. Next slide, please. As you know, now we're operating a significant amount of this work out of Fisherman's Terminal at the Fisherman's Center building in the existing Blue Hub, where we have a number of subleases, and our startup founders come work. We welcome delegations from far away as Korea and France and Sweden, and all of our members have access to this space, hosting monthly meetings for WISTA or the local Propeller Club. All the way to our members coming in, flying in from around the world to hold meetings and engage with our cluster organization. Next slide, please. And we're just really thrilled to be able to watch from our windows over there at Fisherman's Center, the small peak of the supply building moving into the parking lot. We bore through the piling driving and excited every day. And every time we have new folks walk into the Blue Hub, we have those boards up talking about what is the future. It's not just what is the future here, and this center is so significant for so many different reasons, but not the least of which is the fact that we are building in partnership with you the programming, and then certainly the building that is representative of the most innovative maritime industry in the world on top of a historic legacy building. And that metaphor is not lost on people. That we're building this innovative building on top of a historic building, that we are creating and supporting and growing this region as a global innovation hub on top of the historic and legacy sector is not lost really on the globe as they look towards this region as a place for growth. Next slide. The Blue Hub is also how we bring folks together, and excited to see many of you on Friday to our annual State of the Blue event. And we're going to take this opportunity to honor and thank Governor Inslee for the significant work and support he's brought for more than a decade, certainly to the topic and as well as directly to our organization and initiatives, as well as sharing case studies of impact and a really engaging panel discussion on how we're layering public and private capital, all of the different asset classes to support the blue economy. A great panel discussion. So we're excited for many of you to join us on Friday. Next slide. And at the same time looking to bring the globe to Seattle. And this is a slide to share with you that we have just started planning and excited to start engaging more deeply with staff and you, the commissioners at the Port of Seattle, in bringing the One Ocean Week to Seattle, along with the visitation of a significant tall ship, the Stratstad Lundkul, Norway's official training ship, that has global expeditions focused on ocean-based climate solutions and opportunities around the blue economy innovation. Each year in Bergen, Norway is the One Ocean Week Bergen, and partnering with our the relevant organizations and agencies from the embassy all the way to the aquarium in Bergen to host here in Seattle next fall One Ocean Week Seattle as a sister program here. And so you'll be hearing much more from us on this in the coming months. Next slide. I'll just point out again, it's just another indication that we are doing this as part of a global ecosystem. In any given day, we're working with startup accelerators and funders from around the globe, other cluster organizations, economic development organizations, all sharing this vision for a sustainable and equitable blue economy. Next slide. I guess I'll just wrap up. We do have our leadership team here, so making sure that we have plenty of time for questions. The smart folks are in the room behind us if you want to engage deeper. What I'll continue to just share is this partnership with the Port of Seattle has been instrumental for the entire region's growth. Certainly right here for our neighbors and partners from Ballard to South King County, but this is a beacon. And I think the shining light that comes through the windows, well, they're not windows, there's a technical term for the transparent exterior of the Maritime Innovation Center, that light shining over the Ballard Bridge and Fisherman's Terminal and creating an innovation district and creating that light of a global hub here in Seattle is going to benefit, the globe over, as well as most certainly all of our neighbors and partners across the county and across the region. So thank you, and happy for us and our team to answer any questions.
Great.
Commissioners, do you want to get questions in now, or we can go to the next item and present that, and then you can culminate with your questions at that point?
Yeah, let's continue. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide, please.
One moment, we're just changing decks.
Thank you. Well, it's exciting to hear from Josh, and I'm excited and eager for your questions as well. But we do have an existing set of contracts that will continue the very exciting work that Josh is alluding to, and so we just really want to quickly go through that. These are continuations of our existing program, and asking for your authorization on these contracts, as well as the funds to support 2 years worth of contracting. Again, you will hear additional requests over the year as some of these other programs mature and develop that were referenced in the MOU. Next slide, please. We're seeking authorization to execute a contract with Maritime Blue for a 2-year contract. Our current contract ends at the end of this year, so this is initiating for next year, $360,000, as well to acknowledge a competitive waiver was sought to provide for contracting with Maritime Blue as a sole source operator. Next slide, please. Specifically, this agreement will support the 6th cohort of the Maritime Blue Innovation Accelerator, the 2nd cohort of the Business Incubator Initiative that Josh described at Fisherman's Terminal, to continue our support on the work of the Blue Wind Collaborative, the ABLE facilitation that Josh and his team provide there, and additional events. This is what you just heard about. All of these contracts will support all of this work over the next two years. Next slide, please. For the facilitation and other work, technical consultation, collaboration, Maritime Blue provides routine progress updates. They host the Maritime Blue Ventures Showcase, provides for quarterly leadership committee meetings and progress reports on Blue Wind. In 2026, a scope of work for offshore wind collaborative will also be offered. Next slide, please. And that's it. So just looking for your authorization there, and I think now we can continue with questions for Josh and his team, as well as ourselves.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation. And Joshua, thank you for all the work that you're doing. This is an important partnership to the Port of Seattle, and one that I know that my colleagues support significantly. I'll open it up for questions from my colleagues. Commissioner Felleman.
Great. Well, thanks for the presentation. It's a lot of information. I had a couple of questions. Maybe we'll bounce back and forth because I don't want to go on forever. But really appreciate the acknowledgement Port's contributions to get it going and sustain, and leadership we have from Steve is great. I think I commented last time, when you have your pie chart or your wheel of funding, I see, it's great that you're finding more and more sources of funding. I just always felt that you have like local government is like one of the categories, and I always wanted to see port, as one of the subcategories. And I don't know, in the beginning, it was a bigger piece of the pie, but it's different than just local government, and I think it's good to pad it for long-term investments. Anyway, that was one thing. But I was wondering, you were also working on, growing that huge list of contributors. I was just wondering, how is that going for actually getting this membership contributing?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I would be happy, Commissioner Fellman, to break down those budget pie charts. I know we put in the appendix what this upcoming, well, we're in the middle of our budget cycle because our budget cycle is aligned to the states. And be happy to break down and show in more detail specific ports and sort of how the Port of Seattle specifically, or more ports broadly.
Seaport Alliance and all
Seaport
that.
Alliance, Port of Tacoma, and Everett, and others. So happy to break that down further for you. In terms of the pie chart of the types of contributions continue to grow as well. And that's coming through multiple different multiple different sort of avenues or streams. So philanthropic support has continued to grow. That support is, some of those dollars are supporting specific program activities, whether it's work around the Blue Wind or the Youth Maritime Accelerator Project. But some of that also is supporting general operations, recognizing the necessity to have a team and infrastructure to support all the continued growth in programmatic work. Corporate support continues to grow as well. Our corporate membership levels continue to rise, and we continue to get more and more corporate sponsorship, and corporate membership levels continue to grow as well, both by numbers and the amounts in which folks are ready to engage. Some folks are engaging, again, in specific programs. They want to be part of a study or analysis. They want to support a specific program. Others are engaging in multiple levels and bring those dollars through a general membership sort of way in which of engagement. And then we've continued to diversify both our state and federal funding as well.
And you just, was it CLIA or is it Carnival that was a recent big contributor towards the goal?
Yeah,
I know
Carnival is
Corridor.
one of our newest members, yes.
Excellent. Just a couple more. I saw the kelp as being your fishing, part of the sustainable fishing subcategory.
One of,
and
yes.
I was just surprised. I didn't see Sea Grant listed amongst them, given that they have the Seaweed Collaborative that's been going on for some time.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you have all these logos. I just didn't see that one.
Yeah. So they're not formally part of this growers-led collaborative, although we are engaging very closely with Sea Grant and the activity that's taking place around all of that work. These are specifically for they call themselves 3.5 growers. The third just put their gear in the water just a few weeks ago, and the fourth is waiting on their permitting in order to do it. So the gear's in the garage and they're ready to go. So it's the 4 commercial growers in the region that are engaging directly, and they've come to us asking for support to figure out how they collaborate with one another, how they understand what the markets are for seaweed generally, and then what are their shared processing capabilities. So it's a grower-led initiative. That being said, there's a significant amount of work happening around seaweed and kelp, both in conservation and commercial activity, and we are aligned with them as we do the work and put that analysis in place. And Sea Grant will certainly continue to play a role, including the collaborative.
All right, I will defer, but I want to come back talking Blue Wind, but I'm sure there's other questions.
Commissioner Calkins.
Thank you, Joshua, for the presentation. I just want to highlight why Washington Maritime Blue is such a unique and important entity, and why, as the Port of Seattle, we're proud to have been part of the founding of it and will continue to support it. You have undertaken to tackle something that the markets won't do themselves, right? You've got this group of incredible innovators, thought leaders specifically in maritime, who are coming up with really brilliant ideas, but they're at either an early technological readiness level, or because it's a brand new thing, there is no incumbent industry to sort of incubate them along, and you provide that nursery for these organizations, these new entities to grow. And sometimes that's a single, startup LLC, and sometimes that's a sort of cluster of ideas around a new thing. like the joint innovation projects create. And because the prospect of profit is still kind of in the horizon, it's hard to get support and funding for that kind of stuff. And that is where it makes sense for me as a government agency to step in and say, public investment in an entity like this has the prospect for such extraordinary long-term gains in economic activity for the region that we want to help support that. And so that philosophically is why I'm behind this. Now, that is a whole lot easier said than done. And I just want to give you kudos for bringing the two things together that are really hard to do, which is a vision for that, and also the capacity as a manager to execute on that, which is really, really unique. And so I'm super supportive. I'm so glad we get to be the landlord for the Senate. It's going to be the kind of space that people will continue, and now we'll even draw more folks in globally to be a part of this. And I think not only is it exciting to get to host Maritime Blue, but I genuinely believe that it is going to engender the kinds of innovations that not only create economic activity, jobs, business revenue, tax revenue, but also that change the maritime landscape on the green economy, the blue economy, so to speak. We really desperately need now more than ever to continue to pursue radical, world-changing environmental initiatives to address climate change. And you guys are at the forefront of doing that. And so consider this, I wish we could do more. And so I'm so grateful to have your partnership and to get to host this thing. And I cannot wait to go to events at the new space when it opens. So thank you. No questions.
Commissioner, I'll just say thank you and reiterate the incredible leadership of our team as it continues to grow. I mean, what we're attracting to the team to help lead this work and facilitate it and usher that is just astonishing, the group of people that we've been able to put together to support this work. So I just want to continue to pass that kudos on to our team doing this work every day as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. Commissioner Fellman, do you have additional questions?
Sure. That was sort of like given for me. I mean, I'm interested in knowing more details, but I totally support what Commissioner Calkins was saying. I had just a couple of other questions. I understand, the youth, getting kids into maritime has obviously been like, I just remember when I first campaigned, that's like the one thing everybody said, but everybody had like a different idea. It's like the most 1,000 points of light pointing in different directions. So I appreciate that this is yet one more good effort to do that, but I also understand it's hard for recruitment. And I understand that it's also hard for Maritime High School right now. There's there's no shortage of effort and good effort. It's just, it strikes me as a ongoing problem. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is engage the tribal youth in this effort, because I always thought that, they grew up in the fishing community. They are already aquatically inclined. We don't have to convince their parents that that this is a bad pathway. And so, and now we have a tribal liaison, and we're making some progress in there. And I think we just signed a contract with Core Plus, which has that direct connection. So I'm just wondering, do you have a tribal effort going on?
The organization has a number of different engagements with various different tribes. There is engagement across our team and tribes across the region for youth work as well. I might add that what we're finding currently is that it's actually less of a problem in recruiting youth. We've done a lot of work over the last decade to engage communities and community organizations across the region, highlight all the great, wonderful opportunities in maritime. We have deep relationships with community-based organizations that are our sort of recruiting partners. And then we have a team who have shared lived experiences with the number of communities that we're engaging with. And so we are attracting lots of youth right now. And we're bringing them into the bellies of the ferries and to the tops of the cranes and out kayaking and getting engaged across the region. Where we're struggling, I'll throw it out there, is with employers willing to engage, to deeply engage. We pay their wages, we train them, we pay for transportation, we And we work directly with employers to help highlight where there are opportunities for them to remove barriers. That is where the struggle has been. When you have a few tough and bad experiences, it destroys the entire pipeline. So it doesn't matter how many you recruit, and it doesn't matter how many you put into an internship. If you have a few bad experiences, that goes back to communities, right? And so we're doubling our efforts with employer engagement. We're, continue youth engagement, and we're getting into schools and community-based organizations and highlighting to all sorts of different communities, even expanding beyond King County. But it's that deep engagement with employers where I think we're going to actually be able to scale even further. We started 5, 10 interns at a time. That grew to 15, 20, 25 interns at a time. But we need employers ready to sort of step up and engage at the same time, and not just step up and engage and say, yes, I'm willing to have an intern, but sort of open their shops to how they're going to do this to make more accessible pathways.
I got to tell you, there's a thing going on right now with the Coast Guard reauthorization bill. There's a provision in there to reduce the crew size on ATBs because they claim that there's not people to staff it. So we're willing to change the safety regulations in the name of crew size. I mean, I just, obviously it's affecting our ferry schedules, but now we're talking about oil carrying vessels. I just find this to be, quite frankly, I think if the oil industry wanted to raise the salaries, we'll find more people wanting to work on it. But this is like a self-fulfilling prophecy that could lead to significant safety measures, concerns. I was also thinking that with the change of administrations, the question about keeping the maritime sector lead as a vulnerability, and I'm just wondering to the degree that, Maritime Blue would see this as part of the ecosystem you get to work with, is this something that you see as worth preserving?
I think having folks at the state level that continue to help coordinate and support and be liaison directly to state government is absolutely essential. And being able to do that at an industry level that has and can build trust right across those folks is really key. So, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed my time there, and it gave us the opportunity to really convene folks, right? You have the ability to convene, and that's what government does really well. And then to be able to partner with the organizations to then go and implement is the next step in having success in this area. So,
and
no,
you're a
absolutely.
living example of what we can spawn out of that. But I think we might need some letters of support, sort of thing like that. Last question. Is that okay? So I've been participating or watching the West Coast Maritime, whatever they call it, the Marine Resource Committee. And I know the governor's office has been talking to those constituents about offshore wind. And they've been hearing very consistently, especially from the tribes, but from all fishing interests, how much they don't want this to go forward. And I just heard from Oregon that there's some similar concerns down there. I think they put at least the wind side on hold, but I think they're still doing tidal energy work. At least I'm not that close to that. But my concern is that when we talk about supply chain, we're all in. But then I see this provision in there about community outreach, working with tribes and fishing interests, and this, what sounds to me like more than just supply chain. I've raised this in the past. And so if it's just moving stuff through, what is the conversation with fishing and tribal interests that right now, I keep on saying a good example in California would go so long into, don't talk to me, show me, and I think that's what's happening in the Washington, Oregon coast, is skepticism. I'm just wondering, and you say there's no second chance to make a first impression. Obviously, there was a couple of missteps off the Washington coast. So I'm just trying to see what is that aspect of Blue Wind, and what is the port's membership on that? We're on the leadership council, we have work groups. How are we engaged?
Yeah, I'll start there. So the Port of Seattle has a seat on the Blue Wind Collaborative Leadership Committee. It's the formal decision-making structure. that then is broken down into a working group that is really focused, the sort of prime work of the working groups right now is focused on designing the scope of work for a full supply chain analysis and study. So overlaying what we know are the parts and pieces that will support floating offshore wind over our existing industries. What are the port's capabilities, state and region wide? What are our shipbuilding capabilities to do that, especially if we're going to do it in a low to zero emission way, et cetera, et cetera. So the working group is really finalizing right now, actually, the scope of work, and the Port of Seattle has been participating in that working group as well. Your question about sort of what does community engagement
Excuse me,
look like?
Stephanie Jones-Stebbins is our rep on the Leadership Council?
No,
Is that-
it had previously been, so Stephanie Jones-Stebbins has a seat at the Maritime Blue Board of Directors.
Okay.
But on the Blue Wind Collaborative, it had been Dave McFadden, and now Matt has been playing a role. And he's tuning in right now.
Okay, and then on the working groups?
Yeah. We can ask Cassidy, who's playing a role in engaging on the working group level.
Could you please come to the desk and state your name for the record?
I swear it's
Hello, my name is Cassidy Fisher. I'm the Joint Innovation Program Director for Washington Maritime Blue. The Blue Wind Collaborative sits within my portfolio of projects. And Matt Szymanowicz sits on our leadership committee for the Blue Wind Collaborative right now. He and Binuen have been supporting the supply chain mapping working group and participating in those conversations as really great partners. You also asked specifically about how we're engaging with communities and tribes and fisheries more broadly around this Blue Wind work. And our leadership committee in particular has been helping us put together kind of a brochure, maybe like minimizes the level of detail and effort that's going into this work, but a set of outreach materials to bring to communities who maybe aren't as familiar with offshore wind or maybe aren't as familiar with the supply chain specifically and where those distinctions might be. And Matt's been helping us as part of our leadership committee in developing those materials specifically. We have sort of a subgroup of folks that are supporting that work. And so the port's had a significant leadership role in that. In developing those materials. He's also passed it along to port staff to get input from other staff who have more direct experience working with tribes to make sure that that language is bringing that like knowledge and experience to the materials that we're using. And our outreach is using those materials and doing direct engagement to folks that that we can have direct conversations with through various kind of pathways of introduction. And sort of at this stage is really just kind of socializing the conversation that we're having that there's a table at the working group that folks can come to and be a part of if they have an interest in doing so. And getting kind of mixed feedback from different folks and their wanting and willingness to be a part of those conversations, but just making sure folks know that they are invited and that there's a place for them.
So who's our representation on the working groups?
So as was Cassidy mentioned, and thanks for your coverage of all this, we have staff support from Max Szymanowicz, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. But as Dave McFadden had that role in the past, I am now interim managing director, so I have an interim role. And I'm sure when you select the new managing director for EDD, there'll be a reconsideration of that person maybe taking that role as
So
well.
that's not the leadership, you're on the working group level?
Yeah, I took over the role that Dave was.
Yes, so that would be at the leadership committee level, which is like the formal advising on how Blue Wind does its work. The supply chain mapping working group is the place where it's really an open door. So everybody gets to come and be a part of that conversation to really help drive how we do this work moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner.
To Commissioner Fellman's other point, I think the distinction certainly that the state has made around siting versus supply chain, I think is the governor's worked really hard to codify the difference between the two of those. And while the supply chain work right now is being carried forward by Blue Wind, I would say the governor is really focused on WICMAC as the entity examining the question of siting. In fact, I think his upcoming budget has included funds for the types of studies that were requested out of the most recent WICMAC meeting in response to the grid work study that examined what are the kind of guideposts for future consideration. So there is work being done in that area that begins from WICMAC and the communities most impacted by it, and there's no sort of foreordained outcome of that. It's a very, let's look at this from the perspective of these communities most impacted, and that's going to take some time. That'll be some work that
But doing the research is what they've been asking for.
yeah, and really guided by the requests of WICMAC. So
Great, thank you.
I'll just add that those one-on-one conversations we're having with different fishing communities and tribal communities about specifically supply chain, we're receiving some really good feedback. What is the distinction? Is there a distinction? And then certainly that's going to be different for every different community, whether what type of fishing gear you're using, if you're a processor. Every tribe has a different appreciation and relationship to the work that's happening out on the coast and wind. Others interested in different opportunities across manufacturing and job skill development. So they're all different. So we're just in that process to getting the feedback on the relationship specifically to supply chain development.
Great.
Great.
It's just that people are confusing the two, I think. So if you're distinguishing them, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you all for this important discussion, and thank you to Maritime Blue for the important work that you all do, and to your staff that's in the room with us today, and also to port staff that keep this work moving forward for all of us. With that said, I'm going to move us along. Hearing no further questions for this item, is there a motion and a second to approve items number 10B and 10A?
So moved.
Second.
Great. The motion has been made and seconded. Clerk Hart, please call the roll for the vote. Commissioners, please say aye or nay when your names are called.
Thank you. Beginning with Commissioner Calkins.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Fellman.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Mohammed.
Aye.
Thank you. 3 ayes, 0 nays for this item.
Great. The motion passes.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you all so much. And Commissioner Cho, if you're listening, please return to the room. Clerk Hart, please read the next item into the record. Executive Director Metric will then introduce the item.
Thank you. Ms. Talavera, will you please go find Commissioner Cho? Thank you. This is Agenda Item 10C, Adoption of Resolution Number 3829, a resolution adopting the final budget of the Port of Seattle for the year 2025, making, determining, and deciding the amount of taxes to be levied upon the current assessment roll, providing payment of bond redemption and interest, cost of future capital improvements and acquisitions, and for such general purposes allowed by law which the port deems necessary, and directing the King County Council as to the specific sums to be levied on all of the assessed properties of the Port of Seattle District in the year 2025. And item 10D, adoption of resolution number 3830, a resolution specifying the dollar and percentage change in the regular property levy from the previous year per RCW 8455120, providing for an increase of the levy from $8,664,580 to $88,389,944.
Commissioners, at our last meeting, we introduced the 2025 Port of Seattle budget and the 5-year capital plan, and the highlighted changes since we presented the preliminary budget back in October. Adoption of the budget, as you know, we discussed last time, marks the culmination of 5 months of work, including 8 briefings to you since we began the process in May, and your feedback in our iterative process as we've developed the budget for 2025. With annual operating expenses of $678 million and a 5-year capital plan of $5.6 billion, the budget and the capital plan are focused on creating a Port of Seattle for the future for sure. The plan is grounded in the port's values and our mission to provide economic opportunities and quality of life in the region by advancing trade, travel, commerce, and job creation in an equitable, accountable, and environmentally responsible manner. We're coming to you, to the end of a process that has been one of our best years ever by meeting growing demand, raising the bar operationally, and in policies that guide us in expanding opportunity in our communities as well. As we mentioned before, high demand for our essential services and strategic management of expenses means we can continue to meet regional needs and reinvest in the regional economy as well. And today, Chief Financial Officer Dan Thomas will present updates to the capital improvement plan since we were briefed on the preliminary plan in October, and we're also available to answer any questions you may have before final adoption of the budget in the 5-year capital investment plan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan Thomas, Chief Financial Officer, and along with him is Michael Tong, our Director of Corporate Budget Finance as well. So, Dan?
Thank you, Executive Director Metric, and good afternoon, Commissioners. We are pleased to be here to request final adoption of the 2025 budget. There is a presentation attached to the agenda item, but we don't plan to go through the slides. As Executive Director Metric mentioned, at last week's meeting, we highlighted changes that had occurred to the budget since you last were briefed in September and October. And those focused on the operating budget changes. Unfortunately, I neglected to point out 2 changes that occurred to the capital budget. The numbers were actually in the materials we showed you, but there were 2 changes to the CIP, and those included.
Sorry, someone's mic is online, and then the presentation also disappeared.
We're not going to.
Are you using it? No? Okay.
No.
Okay,
Yes.
got it.
So there were 2 additions to the CIP since you saw the budget were presented back in September and October. It was about $124 million, and there was 2 projects. One was the stock building acquisition, which hadn't been approved yet. You approved that more recently. And then there was some additional funding added to the police Axon equipment purchase. That's the tasers and body-worn cameras. That was actually on the consent agenda today. There was some additional funding added for those. So just want to highlight and note those changes to the CIP. They were in the materials we presented last week and in today's materials as well. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner President Mohammed, just noting that Commissioner Hasagawa has joined the call.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Welcome, Commissioner Hasagawa. Dan Thomas, I just want to say thank you so much to you, your team, Michael, for the hard work that you guys have put in to get us to this place. We've had about 8 briefings on the budget throughout this year. And it's, again, probably one of the most important things that we do as a commission is passing the budget and ensuring that our Port of Seattle can operate well, that you all have the manpower to do the important work on behalf of the public. We're adding about 100 new FTEs, bringing us to, 2,700 FTEs as a total to make this work possible that happens at the Port of Seattle. So I just want to sincerely thank you all for this important work that you all are doing. Commissioners, are there any questions for Dan and his team at this time?
Sure.
Commissioner Fellman.
I just love the way it keeps on getting more and more succinct. You really reviewed that beautifully. No, but thank you for the updates and all that. But I just think the contrast between what we see going on at the state and the city and the county, and here we are continuing to grow and do great work. And I think that's a reflection of the leadership of the commission on the port side and the good work you're doing to keep us on track financially. And I think the rest of our neighboring governments can take a note. But even in these times of, challenging trade and other things, to see this budget as it is makes us all proud. So thank you for your work. Thank you, Steve, and I'll leave it to you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cho.
Yeah, I want to echo those sentiments. Obviously, we have some counterparts who are dealing with some pretty huge fiscal shortfalls.
Yeah.
I think the city has $250 million to deal with, and the state has about $10 billion over the next 4 years to deal with. And, I think this is a testament to the tremendous work that your team does, you and Michael do. I want to take a moment to acknowledge as well that I think it's our 19th year in a row receiving an accounting award as a port. Is that right?
I believe that's right for the financial report, yes.
Yeah, and so it's a testament to how well this place is run, but it's also a testament to how unique this organization is truly when it comes to our streams of revenue, how we allocate that revenue, and how we spend that revenue. It's one of the most complicated public institutions in the region, if not the most complicated institution. And so the way that we go about this process, as Steve said, I think budgets are a reflection of our values, and a lot of things that we're investing in today are not just benefiting airport operations, but also benefiting the community, especially communities that might be disproportionately impacted by our activities. So I sincerely appreciate all the tremendous work that you're doing to making sure that we're investing in the right places, that we're staying liquid, and that we're planning to build the port of the future. So thank you, Dan, to Michael, and your entire teams for all the great work that you do. And I look forward to voting for this.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Commissioner Cho. Any comments from Commissioner Hasagawa at this time?
I just wanted to reiterate my gratitude to staff and to my colleagues for just the fantastic camaraderie throughout this process. I'm really proud to see it come to this point, and I look forward to passing this today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Commissioner Hasagawa. Commissioner Calkins? Great. Yes, again, I just want to say thank you to Dan and Michael, and also you both participated in the 101
Community sessions, yes.
community sessions, exactly. And we're out in community, and there was about four sessions that happened, 3 to 4 sessions, and some of them had participants from 20 to 50 people, and it's so great for the public to also understand and appreciate the work that goes into our budget process and how it works, and for them to understand the community investments that we are making. It's things like that we've heard from community that is reflected in this budget, including $200K that's going towards a healthcare benefit for SEA study and report. There's over $500K that's going towards a transit pass program, the TMA program. These are all items that we have inside of the budget that includes things that we've directly heard from constituents wanting to see it reflected in our budget. And so we're making the investments that I believe the public cares about and ensuring that our operation is moving smoothly. So with that said, I will now call for the vote. Is there a motion and a second to approve items 10C and 10D?
So moved.
Second?
Wonderful. The motion has been made and seconded. Commissioners, are there any further discussions or debate on this item? Great. Clerk Hart.
Can I make one?
Oh,
real quick?
yeah, Commissioner
I'm sorry,
Cho.
I forgot to mention this in my previous remarks, but one thing that I think, obviously Dan and the executive leadership team at the port has been looped in on is that I think going into 2025, we are facing potentially some significant headwinds. And I'm trying not to be political here, but obviously as a port, we rely a lot on our federal partners when it comes to grants and support for funding some of our infrastructure projects. And given the uncertainty that we are potentially facing going into 24 and potentially for the next 4 years, I know that Dan, your team, and thanks to the leadership of Director Metric, well, our team has been doing some analysis around how our fiscal picture changes as a result of maybe some funding that we can no longer rely on from the federal government. And so part of the reason that I mentioned this is because I think the public deserves to know that the port is taking into account all the different factors that might affect us going forward. And while we might be passing a budget for 25 that may not have taken into account some of the headwinds we face, that I know that our team and the commissioners are also thinking about how we're going to weather some of the storms heading our way for the next couple of years. So thank you, Dan, and to Michael and Executive Director Metric for being open to that, to planning for whatever it is, or being ready for whatever it is we're going to face in the next couple of years.
Thank you. We look forward to continuing that conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add, I think the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill were both bipartisan bills, and so I do hope that we do get those fundings, and that regardless of what your beliefs may be, that you understand the important roles that our airports and our ports play, both on the maritime and the airport side. So Commissioner Cho, thanks for pointing that out. That's really important. Any additional comments from commissioners? All right, Clerk Hart, please call the roll for the vote on the adoption of the budget resolutions. Commissioners, please say aye or nay when your names are called.
Thank you. Beginning with Commissioner Calkins.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Cho.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Felleman.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Hasagawa.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Mohammed.
Aye.
Thank you. 5 ayes, 0 nays for this item.
Great.
Thank you,
Motion
Commissioners. We
passes.
appreciate your support.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Clerk Hart, please read the next item into the record, and Tyler, Commission Strategic Advisor, will then introduce the item. Welcome.
Thank you. This is Agenda Item 10E, Order Number 2024-13, an order directing the Executive Director to expand alternative transportation options for airport workers through the SEA Moves Transportation Management Association, including through a pilot program to provide free or low-cost ORCA cards to a subset of eligible employees at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, and a study of a dedicated SEA employee commuter bus program.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Tyler Emsky, and I am honored to serve the Commission as one of your strategic advisors. I'm joined today by David Tomporowski, the Port's Transportation Access Program Manager, who has a few remarks before we dive into the actual order. David.
Thank you, Tyler. Good afternoon, Commission President Mohammed, Commissioners, Executive Director Metric. As Tyler said, I serve as Transportation Access Program Manager in SEA Airport Landside Operations, and I manage our Ground Transportation Access Plan, or GTAP. One of the directives from the Commission resolution that created GTAP was for the Port to establish a Transportation Management Association, or TMA, to serve the thousands of employees that commute to and from work at SEA every day with education, engagement, and consulting services focused on transportation and commuting. Commissioners, you'll recall from your October 22nd meeting, a presentation Peter Lindsay and I delivered on our SEA Moves TMA, which is our employee transportation program for all workers here at SEA. SEA Moves will serve as the central organizing effort for a variety of planned initiatives to assist employees with their commute to and from work at the airport. Some of these initiatives will stem from and be informed by the policy direction you provide in this forthcoming order. After Tyler presents the order, I'll be available for any further questions you may have regarding our plans for SEA Moves. And with that, I'll hand it back to Tyler. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Commissioners, for the opportunity to present Order Number 2024-13, sponsored by Commission President Mohammed and Vice President Asagawa. This order directs the Executive Director to expand alternative transportation options for airport workers at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, SEA. As you're aware, SEA is one of the largest employment centers in Washington State, with over 20,000 badged workers. For reasons ranging from operational efficiency to environmental sustainability to just being a good neighbor to our near-airport communities, the Port has pursued the goal of reducing these workers' use of single-occupancy vehicles, SOVs, for travel to and from the airport. However, SEA faces unique challenges as an employment center in achieving this goal, including the fact that thousands of SEA workers arrive at the airport in the early morning hours. We're talking 3 or 4 a.m., when existing public transit options are limited or non-existent. The Port's actions to reduce SOV travel to date have included Commission Resolution 3759, the Ground Transportation Policy Directive, the Ground Transportation Access Plan, Dave was talking about, the GTAP, and the airport's Transportation Management Association, TMA, which is now called SEA Moves. You heard a presentation about that last month, I believe. This order directs the Executive Director to substantively expand the Port's actions under that SEA Moves TMA in the following 5 buckets of work. First, and definitely not least, this order would establish an ORCA card pilot program. The Port would initiate a pilot program to provide free or low-cost ORCA cards to a specifically identified subset of eligible SEA employees. This pilot program aims to encourage the use of public transit amongst airport workers, while at the same time collecting the data that we need to evaluate how subsidized transit passes impact commuting habits in airport operations. Secondly, this order initiates an SEA worker-only bus study and pilot. Staff are directed to assess the feasibility of launching a dedicated SEA employee commuter bus program, and then also actually begin piloting bus service in 2026. This initiative aims to solve for the problems of shift times that don't align with the existing transit schedules and routes by launching our own bus service, starting with areas with high concentrations of airport workers. Third, this order directs staff to negotiate with King County Metro, Sound Transit, and any other relevant transportation providers who work with the ORCA card program to advance off-peak transit service to serve SEA. Next, this order asks Port staff to engage with Washington State's commute trip reduction policy. which currently emphasizes commutes in the 6 to 9 a.m. hours, and also advocate for additional resources and transportation options for large 24/7 employment centers like SEA. And finally, this order requires report backs to the Commission on progress on the elements outlined in the order as part of the Ground Transportation Program report. These report backs shall also include an analysis of the benefits of SEA Moves programming for the airports, employees, travelers, and the community at large, as well as a study of the costs and benefits of a potential employer-paid parking cash-out program for airport workers. These findings are intended to provide the Commission with the information needed to potentially update the Port's Ground Transportation Policy Directive in a future Commission action. I'll briefly review the statement in support of the order, which you can find at the end of the order. This statement refers to the Commission's long history of promoting alternatives to single occupancy vehicle travel and also supports of public transportation in general. The statement also refers to the fact that expanded commute options under the SEA Moves TMA have the potential to reduce the significant costs the airport incurs in purchasing, operating, and maintaining thousands of parking spaces for airport employees, which I know y'all just approved some new purchases last month. So in summary, this order takes significant steps to expand alternative transportation options for airport workers and strengthens public or mass transit as a financially and logistically accessible option for these workers. Thank you for your time. It was really fun to work on this with staff and commissioners and committee. I'm going to go ahead and conclude this presentation, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Tyler, and thank you to the staff that worked on this order. I appreciate the time that went into it. As one of the sponsors for this order, I know that all of my colleagues understand the importance of making it easier for people to come to the airport, including employees. I think it is one of the top sort of issues I hear from constituents who want to either work at the airport or do work at the airport. I've even heard things like, I got hired with an airline and decided not to take the job because it's just really difficult to get to the airport, or I just can't afford to pay for parking in addition to all of the other expenses that are added on. I'm not getting paid enough to also take on that additional cost. And so I think that there is a clear economic benefit in us studying this, better understanding it, and being able to figure out how do we and make it easier for people to get to our airport, to take on jobs here and be excited about it. And I know that all my colleagues share the same interest in wanting to see less single occupancy cars coming into the airport, and this is one way that we can do it. There's a lot of great examples out there, other governments who support free Orca cards, and also the employee bus services. That is another focus that this order includes, is making it easier for people who are trying to get to the airport at 4 a.m. to be able to do it in a safe way, that they can do it together as a collective. And so how do we make that happen, and how are we ensuring that the policy decisions that we're making here are really driven by data and information? And that's what this order does. And so I'm really excited to move this forward today, and I'll pause there and open it up for comments or questions from my colleagues.
I'm just fully in support of the effort.
Commissioner Fellman says he has no questions. The only comment is he's in fully support of the order. Thank you, Commissioner Fellman.
My only comment would be, often when we're looking at budgetary questions, staff will provide us with various alternatives to consider. And one of them is often the no action alternative. And I think what we're addressing here is the no action alternative around this question of, if we didn't engage in all these initiatives that we're exploring with the Ground Transportation Action Plan, in other words, if we have pursued a no action alternative on GTAP, that is a nightmare scenario for our travelers, for our communities. And so we are at a point now where we are needing to engage in a number of innovative approaches to addressing how do we encourage mode shift, how do we think creatively about expanding hours, and that's quadruply true for our workers. I remember one of the earliest conversations I had around the GTAP was, and I can't even remember what staffer deserves credit for this, but they made the point that if you can change the behavior of a worker at Sea-Tac, that means you've got 200 trip days a year that you've changed. Whereas if you change the habits of a passenger, you may get 4 or 5 trip days changed. And so really the power of creating systems for our employees to get to and from the airport that are manageable based on their schedules, their family needs, their budgets, that they can actually switch to from driving themselves or being driven by a loved one to and from the airport. Those kinds of initiatives have enormous benefits, not all of which are monetary. Some of them are hard to quantify, but can have impacts that are clearly benefits to the community, to our institution, and the people who work here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Calkins. And this order was developed in the Workforce Condition Ad Hoc Committee that was put together by Commissioner Hasegawa. Commissioner Hasegawa, do you have any comments at this time?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I first want to acknowledge the extensive work of staff and the aviation team, and as well as the leadership of President Mohammed in the development of this order and this multi-pronged strategy to address some present day and also intensifying needs to be able to move about our region and for our workforce to be able to get to and from this as a place of work. We're passing this in the context of tremendous growth for our region. We know that the actual population growth of our region is what drives some of the travel demands and the commute demands. We know that by 2035, we're going to have an additional 1 million people come to our region for work and to build their families. And we also just passed a budget that adds additional FTEs to our airport. So it's important that we're thinking critically about ways that we can strategize about meeting the travel and transportation needs, not just of the traveling public, but of our workforce. I know that what we're passing is a pilot. I'm going to be paying extra close attention to strategies that work, cognizant that the truest measure of success is going to be ridership itself. So thank you again for this as a first step, and I'm really excited to see what comes next. And to echo the words of Commissioner Mohammed, this is in response to some direct asks that we've heard from community members and our own workforce. I think it's really important that we listen close to what their needs are. And this is a reflection of being responsive to that articulation. So thank you so much for this work, and I look forward to supporting it.
Thank you, Commissioner Hasegawa, and thank you for your leadership as well. Commissioners, is there a motion and a second to adopt order number 2024-13?
So moved.
Second.
Great. The motion has been made and seconded. Clerk Hart, please call the roll for the vote.
Thank you, and I will be calling the vote a little out of order today, recognizing sponsorship and work on this item, beginning with Commissioner Mohammed.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Calkins.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Hasegawa.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Cho.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Fellman.
Aye.
Thank you, 5 ayes and 0 nays for this item.
Very good. The motion passes to adopt order number 2024-13. All right, moving us along, we are now at presentation and staff report. Clerk Hart, please read the next item into the record. Executive Director Metrick will then introduce the item.
Thank you. This is agenda item 11A, the draft 2025 state legislative agenda.
Commissioners, the success of the port is deeply tied to our work with the governor and the state legislature. The state provides key funding, regulation, and policy that not only helps with our infrastructure needs, but also allows us to more effectively pursue our environmental, equity, economic development, and near-port community quality of life initiatives. Our senior government relations manager, John Flanagan, has met with you and the executive leadership team to discuss priorities for 2025 and has incorporated that feedback into the draft legislative agenda before you today. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Flanagan, senior state government relations manager.
Is your mic on, John?
How about now?
Yes, that's
There we
a lot
go.
better. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Executive Director Metrick. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, John Flanagan, Senior State Government Relations Manager for the Port. I'm going to start real quick with something that is not on any of the slides in front of you, which is an election recap. And I'm going to talk very fast because there's a lot to get through here. So, recent election has given us major changes in statewide offices and leadership. That includes a new governor, AG, public lands commissioner, insurance commissioner. We also have major turnover in the legislature this year. For folks that didn't see already, Senator Peterson, within our jurisdiction actually, is the new majority leader in the Senate. We've also got a new Senate lead on the capital budget with Senator Mullet's departure. In total, 9 senators, 11 representatives did not seek re-election to their currently held position. 7 sitting House members ran for Senate. And overall, as of today, we have 15 new state legislators that have been elected. There are currently 7 races that are too close to call that are within the margin for a recount. Overall, what I'm trying to say is that it is going to be a hectic and vaguely terrifying year in Olympia as far as efficiency is concerned. We also saw, of the 4 initiatives that reached the ballot, only I-2066 regarding natural gas services passed. We've also already heard that there will be a legal effort to overturn that initiative on constitutional grounds. As a reminder, counties must certify results by November 26th, and the Secretary of State must certify by December 5th. It's usually done before that deadline. I lay all of this out for you. Next slide, please. To get to what to expect in Olympia this year. It's a long 105-day session during which the legislature will enact the biennial operating, capital, and transportation budgets. And the single largest issue that the legislature must address this year is revenue and passage of balanced transportation and operating budgets. Very quickly, and without going into a ton of detail, because we could probably spend the entire hour talking about finances, depending on who you ask, the operating budget is facing somewhere between a $5 billion to $12 billion shortfall over the 4-year outlook. Last week, OFM and the governor's office released some public documentation stating that they believe that's a $10 to $12 billion shortfall. They've ordered agencies not to create any new programs. We've seen hiring freezes out of DSHS and WashDOT already. Overall, we are, in fact, expecting cuts across current programming, and there's been a directive to state agencies not to request any new programming or expansion of current programs, unless, of course, it's something that basically saves lives or provides K-12 education, that kind of thing. On the transportation budget, we have a similar, more predictable shortfall. You're familiar already with the somewhere between $8 to $10 billion that we need to spend on fish culverts by 2030 to meet a federal injunction. The $10 billion shortfall that's currently expected in the transportation revenue forecast that came out in September doesn't even include new spending. So there's another $1 billion on top for ferries and $4 billion for culverts and lots of other necessary funding that we just don't know where it's going to come from yet, I'll say. All that said, the agenda that I put in front of you today and that I will seek your approval on December 10th at your next meeting does not shy away from making tough asks, regardless of whether or not there will be funding available to pursue those things. Last session, we were successful in advocating for a number of things, just to touch on a couple of them. Clean energy siting, incentives for development of renewables, increasing manufacturing, carbon market linkage, aircraft noise repair and replace, things like that. Advocated for funding for all of the above, and were successful in many of those ventures as well. But we also left a number of unfinished business items kind of on the table. We've advocated for a couple of years for a transit-oriented development bill that would force dense residential development into areas that are already characterized by development, that would preserve our industrial lands. We've advocated for the REWRAP Act, sustainable waste management at the airport, incentives for freight and railroad, childcare, things like that. Following today's briefing, I will incorporate feedback from this public session, feedback that's already been delivered, one-on-ones, but it's not reflected in the draft agenda before you. And then, as I already mentioned, I will spend the next 2 weeks incorporating that feedback and seek adoption at the December 10th meeting. Next slide, please. Again, not something that is in the slides here, but is reflected in the memo before you. We've not opened the agenda this way in past years, but due to the results of the recent federal election and anticipated changes to federal policy, the current draft of our state agenda reaffirms some of the port's commitment to upholding what I called local values there. I've already received additional feedback from both commissioners and executive leadership about additions to that section. Generally, it covers our support for respect for tribal sovereignty, protection for the environment and natural resources, adherence to established labor standards, preservation of generally accepted human rights, and creating and incentivizing equitable economic opportunity where possible. Turning to our priority items. Just a quick reminder, we split this agenda up essentially into two categories. We have priority items, which I'll talk about here today, and then we have a set of legacy issues, long-held positions from the port that are the second half, essentially, of the memo document before you. I won't get into any of that today unless there are questions. So first there, on the screen in front of you, we have tourism. State of Washington Tourism will pursue legislation this session that establishes an industry self-assessment fee at 0.2% per dollar on specified tourism industries. They're also going to pursue a general appropriation in an ongoing fashion of about $4.5 million. That, matched with some private contributions that they'll be seeking, will get us to about $30 million per biennium for tourism throughout the state. That puts us on par with some of the smallest tourism programs in some other states and gives them the resources they need to be successful. As I've said before in front of y'all, we don't fund tourism in this state appropriately, and this is an effort to get us there. The second bullet there on tourism, we'll be supporting a DNR request for $8 million coming out of the capital budget. The idea here is to address increased demand for recreation on public lands. It funds infrastructure needs, improves accessibility, and increases public safety. And the funding will help DNR address concerns from some of our tribal partners and help to protect tribal cultural resources as well. Third bullet there, we have kind of a catch-all for the World Cup. Last session, the state was able to provide resources mainly geared towards local transportation planning and tourism marketing. The item that you have before you today is included to cover any unanticipated costs, is basically what I would say, that we know will come up as we approach 2026. We also know the World Cup is an opportunity to pursue quote-unquote legacy projects that will benefit the region long after those games are gone. So examples include things like transportation investments to expedite movement of passengers to and from SEA, high-speed rail funding, per the work that Penwar is doing, establishing a regional tourism authority that would last well beyond the World Cup, things like that. So far, I've already received some feedback on this section. Staff have additional ideas about things that we can pursue, and we'll just want to follow up with some of the World Cup organizing committee staff to ensure that our asks make sense in tandem. Next thing we have there in front of the screen in front of you is our Green Jobs Ask. As a reminder, we advocated for creation of this program in the capital budget last session to the tune of $25 million with a future biennia appropriation of $100 million. In recognition of the state's budgetary challenges, we're seeking an additional $25 million in the 25-27 capital budget with the assumption that we would pursue the remaining $75 million for that program in the supplemental and then into the 27-29 biennium. The program functions to encourage climate-focused innovation in port-related sectors by funding infrastructure improvements that are necessary to facilitate private sector recruitment and retention efforts in the quote-unquote green economy. So if you're citing a battery manufacturing plant, we could help pay for a wastewater facility or a highway overpass or whatever kind of infrastructure you need to cite. Childcare. For now, we have this here, and also shout out to staff Abby Lambert for being our model on the presentation that's in front of you. We have this section mainly to address support for existing and ongoing programs like ECAP, that's Early Childhood Education and Assistance, the Working Connections Child Care Program, and child care provider training programming, all of which we supported in last year's budget and advocated on behalf of. Additionally, Commerce has submitted an ask this year to the tune of $2.4 million to benefit community childcare capacity, which I believe that we would be able to access theoretically for some of the work that we're doing to increase childcare opportunities. The goal here is to actively engage in efforts that may benefit the port's ongoing work to increase childcare opportunities for workers at port facilities. If we actively engage in debates around childcare access and affordability this coming session, theoretically it sets us up to pursue any related legislation that might be necessary to carry forward our goals in 2026 and beyond. Next slide, please. Here I have a slide. I would call this support for business and innovation, but really traditional economic development opportunities, things that the legislature does tend to cut in an austerity budget, even sometimes not in an austerity budget. That top level item at the Department of Agriculture is exactly what you would think. It is support for our farmers, it's import-exports, it's making sure that we are doing everything we can to support natural resource industries, in this case food. Circular Economy Accelerator. This is something that the Department of Commerce has been really successful with. Just as a reminder, circular economy is the idea that we're not going to throw things away. We are going to push things back through to ensure that we are getting the full benefit and use of any and all materials, regardless of whether or not they're raw materials for manufacturing, things like that. This is a $10 million ask to continue the accelerator program that already exists. I've spoken with a number of port staff that want us to figure out how to get more involved in the circular economy and potentially create our own program. I think that this could help us get there. That ask around small business disaster grants is $40 million at the Department of Commerce. Frankly, there's a gap in terms of assistance available to small businesses when they encounter usually a natural disaster. I think about some of the businesses that were affected by flooding up in Whatcom and Skagit counties in the past couple of years. FEMA assistance doesn't cover everything. L&I assistance doesn't cover everything. This helps folks, especially folks who tend to be WIMBY firms, small businesses, things like that, get back on their feet appropriately. I'll just touch on a couple more here. The $10 million for industry sector development funding, that's to continue the state's ICAP program in part. We, at one point, were basically leading the nation in terms of cluster development programming, and it was all funded with federal money, and the state has not done enough to support those programs and support continuation of our cluster development. And real quick, international economic development, included this in here is an $8.7 million ask from Commerce because we know for a fact that last time a Trump administration was responsible for foreign policy as it related to trade, it meant terrible things for Washington-based businesses as they tried to access international markets. They're going to need that support more than ever, we think. Next slide, please. Moving from economic development and workforce into aviation. Here we have a slide, really is just a summary of the priorities that we've already agreed to with the various START communities. So as a reminder, we have created a START state agenda this year, which is shared agenda between the port and the various communities that make up the START committee. I won't get into any of these necessarily unless there are questions, but it breaks down each of those individual bullets probably has another 5 sub-bullets per the actual START state agenda that I'm happy to share. On noise repair and replacement, we do not currently see a need to pass legislation this coming session to uphold the work that we're already doing here. However, we did want to include the flexibility to support whatever legislative changes might be necessary to ensure that state regulations and programming are complementary to both federal and port programs and funding in an ongoing way. We have $1 million that's currently still sitting at the state level in a non-appropriated account that rolls over. We will access it and use it when it is appropriate. There will very likely be support and an ask this year from some of our friends in the legislature to increase the amount of funding that's available from the state for these things. Frankly, what I've heard from our noise team is that we're not ready to access those dollars yet. We're taking this slowly. We're building the best program we can, and we'll move forward when we're ready in a way that makes the most sense for, I think, us and the communities as well. Second bullet there regarding regional airport capacity. This is siting of a second commercial airport serving the region and the operation of the commercial aviation work group. As a reminder, a couple years ago when the COG was created, the governor decided to veto several sections of the bill that stripped out things like deadlines for the work of the group, any kind of clear and substantive recommendations for action, things like that. I've talked with a couple members of the legislature about trying to reinstall some of those requirements and some of those deadlines. It appears that we'll be able to do it via proviso. At least that's, I believe, Representative Fai's preference. On top of that, I'm very concerned in the budgetary year in front of us that we're not going to adequately fund the operations of the commercial aviation work group, which only further delays our ability to site an airport to move forward in what we already know will be a decades-long process. On air quality, again, given the budgetary outlook, this is us playing defense. This is us continuing to advocate for existing air quality programs and funding, continuing to support investments in OSPI programs that improve air quality in schools, for example, and establishing frequent and ongoing engagement and communications between the communities in South King that should be able to access those programs to ensure that they're actually reaping the full benefits there. I will skip over the SAF bullet for now, just because the next set of bullets all address the SAF, but there is one thing in here. The SAF Research and Development Center up at Paynefield will make an ask this year. I believe it's $35 million in total across the operating and capital budgets to expand the work that they're doing that I do believe we're partnered really well with them on. So we will want to support that ask as it comes forward. I will know more in the near future as they further develop that proposal. The last bullet there regarding decarbonization of ground transportation is a bit of a catch-all. It's support for proven strategies, policies, investments that are intended to phase out the use of fossil fuels, reduce overall emissions from ground transportation networks that serve the airport, which includes things like EV charging, investments in multimodal and active transportation, and then active engagement in federal and state efforts to establish a regional high-speed rail network. We also have in here a bullet regarding trying to reestablish state leadership around electric aviation. There was a work group that concluded several years ago, and no one's really taken up that mantle since then. I believe that there's some legislative sponsorship that we can encourage, and we can move forward with electric, or being more authoritative on electric aviation, I should say. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, here is everything on SAF. So, WSU is working to publish the updated set of recommendations that they are required by statute to publish every 2 years regarding sustainable aviation fuels. I have here before the Commission a request to support all of the recommendations from the updated set of recommendations. First things first, preserving the existing incentive. So current incentive isn't available until cumulative SAF production in the state passes 20 million gallons per year. There have been several efforts to lower that threshold in the name of helping producers to access incentives sooner. Rather than lowering those thresholds, though, I would say the rest of the recommendations in the report sweeten the deal. They make it so that we don't have to adjust the existing incentive to ensure that we can secure domestic production. On the property leasehold excise tax exemption there, I will just say it's the state's portion. I don't need to talk about the way it would actually operate, but there would also be a local option. So essentially a local jurisdiction that wants to encourage that via creating a local exemption could do so at their own will. The SAF infrastructure grant program that's created there is actually mainly benefiting us. So this is something that Senator Leas wants to do, I believe, out of the transportation budget, probably still from CCA revenue. The idea would be to create a publicly owned SAF infrastructure, meaning blending facilities, pipeline, whatever you need essentially to get SAF in and out of SEA. We would own it in perpetuity. We would lease it on a long-term lease to whoever, whether it's fuels producers or airlines, whoever needs to be on there. Construction sales tax deferral, this is just making a slight amendment to an existing program. Construction sales tax deferrals exist for certain clean energy projects. Currently it applies to like hydrogen, commercial scale, solar, and I think onshore wind. This would apply to SAF facilities as well. And then on permitting, this would carry forward some of the work we supported a couple of years ago, asking Ecology to generate programmatic EISs for certain clean energy facilities. Applies it to SAF as well. Real quick, Clean Fuel Standard is not listed here, but is listed in your memo. We'll just continue to monitor updates to the Clean Fuel Standard. They are currently implementing recommendations and requirements from the incentive bill we passed a couple of years ago, ensuring that as they amend the Clean Fuel Standard, we don't disadvantage SAF production and use, essentially. On diverted aviation fuel tax revenue, I know that I've talked to each of you about this and your eyes glaze over every single time because it's boring. I understand that. The state has been in long-term continued non-compliance with FAA regulations around aviation fuel tax revenue for almost a decade at this point. I'm proposing that we support a strategy in Olympia this year to hopefully bring the state back into compliance while also ensuring that the funding that is currently being sent to MOTCA can remain there so that we can keep our toxics cleanup program whole, and instead we can dedicate those revenues towards PFAS cleanup at airports. I think it keeps our smaller airports happy. I think it keeps our environmental community happy, and I think it keeps us happy as well. The only issue at this point is that we don't know how a Trump administration will react to the idea of doing PFAS cleanup at airports and an FAA under the Trump administration. I won't touch on SAMP because we are planning on pulling that out of here, actually. But on the REWRAP Act and Sustainable Waste Management, this is the same proposal we've supported for a couple years, doing more on responsible producer criteria, doing more on sustainable waste management at the airport, essentially. And I don't need to get into details there because you've heard it already. Next slide, please. Transportation. On revenue, which as I mentioned at the top here, is one of probably the most important issues that we'll address in Olympia this year. Rather than having the Commission endorse or support any specific transportation revenue idea, I've laid out a couple of key, I would say, philosophies almost that we can support. If we are supporting transportation revenue that benefits freight and the supply chain, enhances competitiveness of the gateway, prioritizes multimodal and active transportation, and continues to decarbonize, then that checks all the boxes. That should be something that we would be more than happy to pass. I'll tell you right now, none of the ideas that are out there are going to do all those things. I think they will all do versions of pieces of each of them. And I can talk about some of the things that will run this year, but writ large, none of these ideas will backfill the giant hole we have in the transportation budget. They're all longer-term strategies. And whatever happens this year, it will be a multi-year effort in order to answer a much larger problem with fundamental transportation revenue. I know you've been briefed on the road usage charge by Seaport Alliance staff already, so I don't need to get into that necessarily. But we expect that Jake Fye will drop a RUC bill at some point here. He's planning on having meetings throughout December to seek stakeholder feedback. With your support, I'd like to say that we're going to be at the table on those things. There's an idea around vehicle sales tax diversion. This is a recycled idea. It's been around for a couple of years. It used to be that the Republicans were very, very supportive of using vehicle sales tax revenue in the operating budget, dedicating it towards transportation. The idea there mainly being that they wanted to pay for maintenance and preservation on county roads and in rural areas, but they would leave behind a giant hole in the transportation budget if that were to occur. The reason that this idea is so popular this year and may stand a chance of moving forward is that there is an idea out there around a so-called Amazon tax. Rumor is that there will be some sort of mega corporation tax that would backfill that giant hole in the operating budget left behind by vehicle sales tax diversion. Just real quick, the other 2 or 3 things that are out there for your background and awareness. There's a statewide delivery fee program bill. The JTC recently published a final report on this. There are a couple other states that have done something similar, but the idea would be elevated delivery fee that pays into local transportation networks. This is mainly for the cities because they're not going to be able to access any of the RUC revenues in the long term. And there's a idea out there about taxing tires based on efficiency. It's something that the Department of Commerce supported last year, not well supported by a number of stakeholders, and so I don't think it'll advance this year, but it is something to be aware of at least. On transportation funding models, P3. So there has been, for a long time, work being done at the state level by the Joint Transportation Committee to implement a P3 system for transportation projects. The basic idea is we have a constitutional prohibition against using private capital in order to fund state transportation projects. This would give us a framework to do that. This is also the bill that WashDOT staff believe they need to pass in order to pursue the WASCA project under the C40 process that they're currently pursuing. It's a transportation project to them, and they want to pull in the private capital. So I'm recommending that we support passage of that bill, whatever it ends up looking like, in order to facilitate that. We also have a supply chain competitiveness program bill before you. This is a WPPA priority bill from last year, 6302, that would essentially create a supply chain competitiveness grant and loan program just serving ports. It would help us pay for transportation infrastructure to ensure successful and efficient operation of the supply chain, sustaining the trade economy, efficient movement of freight, things like that. Moving to TDM and CTR, you were just talking about the order that we have before us. Where I'm proposing we pursue several strategies to carry forward the port's order on transportation demand management. Number one, assess and very likely pursue legislation to amend the off-peak hours language that exists in the current RCW to ensure that we can access existing incentives. We would also support legislation that would extend that existing incentive program it ran last year. And then from there, focus on ensuring that we are eligible to a number of existing WashDOT grant programs. I'm thinking especially about the regional mobility grants that could help us pay for some of the assets that would be necessary to carry forward the program. Last but not least, we would seek certification and clarification from the UTC on waivers. So Microsoft, Amazon, all of those folks that run shuttle programs, they have some sort of a waiver from UTC. I don't know why it doesn't apply to us, and we can find out. I won't touch on major transportation projects too much unless there are questions. We need another 150-ish million to finalize Gateway on the current timeline and without any further delays. We'll be seeking that in the transportation budget this year. I think we have really good support. This is the second year in a row I'm asking for that same thing, so apologies for that, I guess. SR 518, we conducted a study in partnership with WashDOT that concluded in 2020. At this point, study's almost a decade old. It ranged very small things like lane striping all the way up to like a full replacement of the intersection between I-5, 405, and 518. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, and if we don't start executing on some of the smaller asks now, we're never going to advance any of it. And I think they're going to come back and tell us we need to conduct another study. So proposing that we try to make some small asks now. Revive I-5, we still don't have the full proposal yet, but proposing that we support the work of our partners in the Seattle area as they focus on additional mitigation funding for the Revive I-5 project. I think it's probably somewhere to the tune of $20 to $50 million, something like that in the transportation budget, but helping to ensure that transportation throughout the city of Seattle and port adjacent facilities throughout the city are operating efficiently, I'll just say. High-speed rail, same thing as I've had in a couple of different documents I've sent around. Given the current budgetary outlook, protecting $50 million that we currently have invested in ongoing regional high-speed rail study is going to be really difficult. So proposing here that we advocate to keep that in place and not miss out on federal money that is probably 5 times the amount that we currently have invested in the state's budget. Next slide, please. Environment and energy. A couple things here. Clean energy siting. Here I'm proposing broad support for the same things we've advocated for in the past 2 sessions. We've supported bills to streamline the siting process on the environmental review and on the land use side. Proposing here that we continue to support those kinds of things as they come up, which we expect to see at least one more bill this year that focuses on SEPA land use in order to facilitate clean energy projects. Additionally, in that first bullet, I'm proposing that the Commission support efforts to assess our ability to construct and maintain clean energy facilities for our own purposes. It's not yet clear to me, and I haven't been able to get a good answer from anyone around here about what our limitations are. And the other ports are also very interested in this. There's a WPPA Energy and Resiliency Work Group proposing that we take the time this session to really socialize the idea and pursue joint legislation with the rest of the ports, very likely in 2026 on this. Second bullet there, although is a little obtuse, it's essentially saying that we submitted formal comments to Ecology in July on 2 documents that address clean energy siting, and that we should continue to support the recommendations we made in those comments. Just as an example, we talked about creating a single consolidated online platform for permit applications for clean energy projects. We talked about sidestepping creation of a new SEPA checklist on clean energy projects in favor of exempting more projects from SEPA wholesale. And we talked about supporting the establishment of incentive areas, they call them clean energy preferred zones, and establishing build-ready clean energy programs. Basically, do everything we possibly can to create incentives with land, and to set up areas in which we are directing investment rather than wholesale incentives across the state. Next bullet there, blue wind and offshore supply chain. I don't need to get into it because the folks from Maritime Blue were already here today, but now that the CCA will continue to exist, they have received funding out of the 2024 supplemental. I know that they will have an additional ask in 2025. I think they're requesting $1.25 million over the course of the biennium to support the ongoing work of the supply chain collaborative. On transmission, I'm essentially saying here that we will support all state-level policy and budgetary solutions that benefit construction of transmission infrastructure, which goes towards funding and incentives for workforce, training, career-connected learning, opportunities, apprenticeships. Essentially hire as many electricians as you possibly can and put them to work quickly. Also, obviously, efforts to streamline permitting. Site certification, this is support for a joint legislative effort that's sponsored by the Ports Association and the Washington Economic Development Association to streamline the current site certification process. Has huge benefits for clean energy, but is not just isolated to that. Sustainable maritime fuels, again, folks from Maritime Blue are already here talking about it. And again, now that the CCA will continue, re-upping funding in the 25-27 biennium to support the ongoing operations of that work. Port electrification grants, we were successful in getting $1 million out of the available, I think, 26.5 in the enacted budget. I am proposing here that we support expansion of that program. If we're able to secure an additional 30-ish million to WashDOT for continuation of that program, we would probably come in seeking somewhere around 10 this coming time. We shrunk our ask in this past cycle because we were concerned about wanting to show the effectiveness of the program and ensuring that lots of other ports were able to access, spread it around. Medium and heavy-duty ZEVs, mainly this is support for continuation of dedicated funding for zero-emission vehicles, incentives for owner-operators, all of the things that I know the Seaport Alliance has already talked to you about. But real quick, I will also just mention there is conversation out there about decoupling from the California Clean Trucking Standard. I know that each of you is already thinking about this quite a bit. Setting aside the politics and the direct impacts of that bill, I think the debate in Olympia does still provide opportunities to carry forward other priorities. In an amended agenda that I'll put in front of you in a couple weeks, I'm proposing to, rather than focus solely on EVs, explore opportunities to incentivize other technologies like hydrogen and non-zero but cleaner fuel types like renewable and green diesel, things like that. On ISGP, again, I know the Seaport Alliance has already talked to you about this, but as a quick reminder, the main point of emphasis here is us trying to legislatively establish a safe harbor provision that would prevent entities like us from litigation if we're engaged in what I would call good faith efforts to come into compliance, take corrective actions, or otherwise address ongoing issues with implementation of the new industrial permit. That will also be coupled with an ask to increase stormwater infrastructure funding at the state level substantially. Last couple here. Next slide, please. Oh, I think I may have missed one. Next slide again. Sorry about that. Last couple. On civil asset forfeiture, I'm not sure if Commissioner Hasegawa is still here, but we will continue to pursue legislation to allow use of revenue from civil asset forfeiture proceedings for public education, other programming to stop guns, drugs, and sex trafficking through our gateway. Additionally, we'll almost be forced to monitor and engage in broader ongoing efforts to amend the civil asset forfeiture system in Washington. Because we were called out in that SAO report, we will continue to have to be at the table and with the other policing agencies as they work through all of this. On enforcement authority, continuing to support ongoing joint efforts with WashDOT to address parking and safety issues along the shoulder of the airport expressway. Along with that, I'm proposing that you consider pursuing legislation to enable state agency enforcement of parking violations and issuing of citations on roadways adjacent to port facilities. Obviously, that would not involve State Patrol driving all the way up to the terminal at the airport or anything like that, but on those areas where it's 518 meeting with the airport expressway, can we figure out a solution? This also proposes partnering with WashDOT and State Patrol to explore use of automated enforcement on the airport expressway as a means of even sidestepping that second proposal. On tax and revenue, supporting the work of mainly cities, counties, Ports Association, other local government folks as they attempt to raise or eliminate the current cap on local property tax increases. This is the 0.1% rule. Last session, there was legislation that was introduced. I actually think it stands a chance of passing this year, so supporting our other local government partners. Also, if they have fewer revenue problems, we very likely do as well. On TIF, this is continuing to seek to establish a limit on the number of overall diversions from our underlying tax base. I think that's the easiest way to talk about it. Governance, the Public Records Act. And this is support for joint efforts by the Ports Association, cities, counties, et cetera, to limit Public Records Act violations by local governments and special purpose districts that are engaged in good faith efforts to comply. I believe it was the Seaport Alliance that got tagged for a couple like 26 million, 16 million, or sorry, 16,000, 26,000, something like that for a frivolous request, trying to sidestep those kinds of issues in the future. Emergency powers. This is a direct response to the recent cyber attack that continues to impact port operations. This is proposing to explore opportunities to update the emergency power statute and to theoretically grant the port expanded authority that's comparable to other local governments. Because we're a special purpose district and not a general purpose government, we just don't have the same authorities. So figuring out a way to put us on par so that we can avoid those kinds of issues in the future, especially with payroll, et cetera. And last but not least, on the PERS system. Commissioner Fellman talked to me about this, I think, my first week on this job, wanting to continue to pursue administrative changes that would allow public employees that are already in the PERS system to accrue service hours after they're elected to serve as a port commissioner. As you well know, there is a current prohibition in the statute. Port commissioners are treated very differently than other local government officials when it comes to accessing state retirement systems. And with that, I will stop. The rest of what is in front of you, the rest of these slides are your legacy positions, things we've advocated for years. All of these things should look very, very familiar. And so unless there are specific questions, I won't necessarily delve into any of them.
Thank you, John, for that detailed presentation. I will open it up for questions from my colleagues at this time.
I do see Commissioner Hasagawa has her hand up.
Oh, let's start with Commissioner Hasagawa.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, John, for the presentation and for taking the time before the meeting to meet with each of us as commissioners and also as staff to be able to present this with us. Thanks also for connecting with NWSA to make sure that some of our asks are going to be aligned with what we're doing with the Alliance and as our legislative team there gears up for legislative session. I just want to open by saying that I'm really glad that to see that Initiative 2117 failed, which secures the Climate Commitment Act funding as a funding stream available to port authorities such as ours. And so I'm glad just we have that political context, as well as I think a cohort of legislators and executive branch who are sensitive to the needs of ports and are pretty well familiarized with what our priorities are. So I wanted to ask specifically when it comes to high-speed rail, do you know about, can you just elaborate a little bit about what sort of conversation might be happening on the House side, given the shortfall and given just sort of some of the complications that we're aware of politically? What do you see as like who's going to be leading the charge? What's our role as support to be able to push that conversation forward?
The advocacy to push that work forward happens in the Senate. The House is a much more difficult landscape. The chair of House Transportation has not supported the continued funding of high-speed rail for quite a while, has tried on multiple occasions, and not necessarily criticism, just fact, has tried to reallocate those funds towards what he feels are other pressing needs. He thinks that this is a much, much longer term project strategy, whatever you want to call it, and that we have major gaps in other parts of our transportation funding. And he's right. But at the same time, similar to our work on setting of a second airport, the further we delay, the longer it'll take for us to actually make any progress. I think if we are going to be successful in the House, it is going to be us relying on some of the climate champions and, frankly, some of the new legislators as they come in, and trying to get in front of them early and often to talk about why this work is so important and to emphasize that it would be a major boon to the region and would solve a lot of our issues. I don't know if that actually answers your question, Commissioner.
It seems to me that if a legislator is opposed to or doesn't feel the urgency of a high-speed ground alternative to meet our current and emerging transportation needs, then they would be a voice in support of welcoming a second airport to their region. Yeah. So what is in your estimation, is the political appetite under the newly elected governor or under Governor-elect Ferguson for continuing the conversation for a second airport siting?
So on the first thing you mentioned there, just really quickly, Representative Fye is very supportive of the work of the COG. He ran that bill several years ago. He wants to set a second airport. I would point out, though, that he's very much opposed to doing anything with existing military installations. I don't know how the incoming administration is looking at the second airport, if I'm perfectly honest. I think we have a lot of work to do with them in the next month and a half before they come into office to convince them of the grave importance of the issue. And I could certainly use the help of anyone who is serving on that transition team as we try to figure out what their position is.
All right, and I will just note that both Commissioner Mohammed and myself were named to the governor's transition team. So that first meeting will take place this coming Friday, and we're happy to report back and keep folks posted on sort of what we're able to learn about the emerging priorities of the new administration. Last year, we approached the state legislature to discuss funding for sound insulation. They funded a vehicle, but they didn't put any money to it. Where is that in our priorities for this upcoming legislative session, and what sort of political sensitivities or strategies can we be aware of or support?
Yeah. There is still $1 million sitting in a non-appropriated account at the Department of Commerce right now. We are the only eligible applicant that can ever apply for those dollars. When our noise team is ready to access them and to do repairs on actual addresses and to repair failing quote-unquote port packages, we'll be able to access that money. We also have strong legislative support to increase that funding if and when we need to.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you so much for your hard work.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you for those questions, Commissioner Cho.
Yeah, well, first of all, John, thanks so much for the comprehensive report out on the state legislative agenda. It seems like our agenda gets longer every year on the state level, and I think it's a testament to your superpower of tracking all this. I don't know how you go down to Olympia and advocate for all of the things that you just mentioned, but and I know we have some contract lobbyists to help us out, but I appreciate all the great work that you do to keep us keep our thumb on all the important things that pertain to us. One of the things that I wanted to emphasize, given the current circumstances, to Commissioner Hasegawa's point, the Climate Commitment Act is sticking around. And I mentioned earlier while we were passing our budget that we are headed towards some headwinds. I think sustainability is probably where we're going to get hit the most. I think the Inflation Reduction Act is probably most likely to get the brunt of the beating from this new administration, which means a lot of the work that we plan to pursue on sustainability might be at jeopardy of losing federal funding. But obviously, despite this, we as a commission, as an institution, are firmly committed to the values of reaching our net zero goals. And I think in the absence of federal support and leadership on this issue, this is where the state needs to step up. And now that we've received affirmation from the voters that they want the Climate Commitment Act, I think it's time for us to do a full court press to make sure those dollars head our way to make sure that we're meeting some of those goals. So I certainly hope, and I know you intend to put some hard-pressed pressure on our partners in the state legislature to make sure that we're at the top of minds for allocation. And I know we're going to do our part in talking to our colleagues in Olympia, but I think that's probably among the many things on our list of priorities, something that we need to plan for this session, but also the forthcoming sessions where these monies will be allocated. So I want to thank you in advance for all that advocacy, and I certainly look forward to going down to Olympia to join the ranks of our advocacy. Thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Cho. Commissioner Fellman.
Thanks for mentioning PERS. You also did mention that there might be an administrative way to address this, and look forward to your research on that. Understanding the motivation here is obviously I would never be eligible, but I'm hoping that this would be at least not a disincentive for folks to run for commission. And so that's why I want to make sure that people won't be penalized for continuing their public service. Just so you know my motivational condition. I'm really of the belief that that while we pursue SAMP in a full-throated fashion, we need to be promoting another airport in a similarly full-throated fashion. And there was a time when the port didn't even want to talk about another airport because they thought it would somehow jeopardize SAMP. I'm of the belief if we don't start talking about another airport, it will impact our ability to pursue SAMP. Because people are going to start looking at the fourth runway in their mind, right? So, I'm of the belief that floating. So it's good for the whales. No, so the idea that there was a committee that hasn't been fully populated, I understand. And so it's sort of in some stasis. And obviously with the change in administration, this is a vulnerability. The fact that Mr. Fye is supportive of the idea, that's great. The fact that he doesn't want to talk about JBLM is just that he's wrong. But other than that, we need to have the conversation going. And so I just don't know what is your what is your view on how we could advocate to make sure it keeps on rolling?
So the strategy laid out in the document before you, I think, is the best one, which is whether it's in legislation, which we're happy to pursue, but I know that's not the preference of the legislators we've talked to. Probably via proviso, reestablish the deadlines that the COG must complete work by, that must provide recommendations by, provide adequate funding for the ongoing work of the work group, and then I would say actually reestablish executive branch leadership on the COG as well. I mean, currently the governor doesn't have a position. There's no governor's designee that must participate or anything like that. I can understand the benefits to not having the administration directly involved there as well, but I think it would provide an authoritative and beneficial perspective.
All right, thank you. I've mentioned to you before, though, that I'm of the belief that the current SAF incentive in the current legislation is contrary to our interest, and that this funding only comes available if there's a certain amount of production in the state. And I'm all about supporting production in the state, but we have to start using it. And then we can, once we have a commitment of volumes burned, when we held our workshop, the refinery said, like, make me a long-term commitment and we'll just build a refinery. We don't need, we don't need incentives other than long-term commitments. So getting the fuel flowing through here is the critical thing. This infrastructure stuff is great if we can, own it and then lease it, but I don't understand why we have to have a trigger for production in order to get use. And I think the motivation for green diesel is a really good one towards that end, because more green diesel that's used allows the refineries to make the profit level that would allow them to produce SAF. So I'm not quite sure. I understand the motivational condition, but we're in such a nascent place in the use of SAF that I really don't know why we would. Maybe there could be a second incentive, but to just say you can't touch the money until you have a high volume of production, I think is running before you can walk. I think last thing, SEPA exemptions get the environmental community very concerned.
Right. Absolutely.
And no matter how admirable the project. I like this idea, though, you mentioned about like identification of preferred locations. So if you have a community that is interested in participating, right, I could see that's where a SEPA streamlining would make the most sense. To have a blanket SEPA streamlining, it sounds more like dead on arrival or unnecessarily antagonistic on arrival. So are those two things being considered as being paired together?
Simple answer, yes. And I can't quote the recommendations from the Siting Council's report from this past summer for you, but I do remember, and I would have to call in like Matt Smanowitz because I know he read it in more detail than I did. One of the considerations there was local jurisdictions identifying those areas, essentially, and it very much being driven from the bottom up, similar to the SEPA process and having adequate public comment and all that. So again, simple answer, yes.
So once you identify a site, then you can get busy building.
I think so, yeah.
And just, you're not going to, WASCA, if we go for the PPP amendment, it's not going to include any change in zoning.
I don't believe so. And that is something that I think is interesting in this. The P3 bill talks about creating a framework to allow private capital use and setting up, checks on that for major transportation projects. At no point does it talk about specific types of zoning or what kinds of projects would fit into this. I think WashDOT has kind of made the determination that to them, WASCA is a transportation project and therefore would fit into that. Yeah, stop there.
No. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Culkins.
Just two quick things. One, I'm reminded of the Mark Twain quote that a lie will make it around the world before truth gets its boots on. There is no discussion of a fourth runway anywhere else.
I thought you were accusing me of being a liar, Commissioner.
Yeah, I know. I just want to make sure people know that is humor and that it is not in consideration. There's nowhere to put it. We're not going to float one, nothing. So rest assured, folks. The other thing is, I just want to thank John for being a part of something called the Cascadia Sustainability Aviation Accelerator, which is kind of a nascent working group that includes partners Alaska, Boeing, Snohomish County, and their effort to build a SAF, not research facility, but certification facility, as well as WSU and PNNL. And they are looking really hard at the question of what are the policy changes that may need to be addressed. And I think you, Commissioner Fellman, you were referring to one around kind of the disparity in incentives for SAF versus other types of renewable fuel. And right now things are really heavily weighted in the biodiesel market towards biodiesel used for road transportation. And that actually makes it hard for other users to compete, including aviation, to compete for that. So whether it's a leveling of the playing field or recognizing that maybe that market is robust or no longer needs incentives and shifting incentives to other areas like aviation and maritime, I think is a really strong area of consideration for the Port of Seattle and other entities interested in the development of sustainable aviation and maritime fuels. So I'm glad that we're a big part of that conversation at the state level, particularly at a time when we're uncertain about what the federal support will be for those kinds of programs going forward. So, and besides that, no, I appreciated the briefing you gave me earlier this week or last week, whenever that was, and I've got no further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, thank you, John, for the presentation and the information. I'm going to move us along. So, Commissioners, that concludes our business agenda for the day. Are there any closing comments or motions related to committee referrals at this time from Commissioners? Commissioner Colgan?
I was just going to say we all got to get home before the bomb cyclone. My favorite new word of the day is bombogenesis, which is apparently the actual meteorological event that precipitates a cyclone. So I'm going to use that in my next Scrabble game. Bombogenesis.
Got it. Commissioner Fellman?
So I just wanted to say what a great meeting the port held in Sea-Tac on Saturday to engage the community in the review of SAMP. I think even though some folks were not supportive of the project, they were very appreciative of the extra effort the port's going through above and beyond anything the FAA would have considered. So, and it was well-staffed and it was very informative. I must say the transportation one where the mitigation is called for could use another graphic. It's complicated, and I think people should know better. Or it took me a while to get my head around it. But that was really good. I do think, though, one real shortcoming that I've been referring completely, here's the comment form, and every one of those panels in there were right out of the EA, and there wasn't 3 letters on any of them, FAA. The FAA has taken no responsibility to say that this is their document. And we are saying, send your comments to the Port of Seattle. And at some point in time, we're going to do a SEPA analysis where we have control over it. And if we can't distinguish this, the public is completely lost. And we are being misrepresented as commissioners. So I have a real problem with this. And if their FAA is telling us otherwise, I'm just going to talk to Congress about that, because it's unreasonable that a review government agency cannot put their name on their own document. So I just feel a little strongly about that, as you might not, because I've been asking for this since the get-go. So this otherwise was a great meeting, and I really think that the public greatly appreciates the extra efforts that we're doing, and we can make that distinction. Finally, we keep on getting comments about like the Des Moines Creek project and other places. I would like to make sure that when we have large developments, that we have options for tours, for field trips. It's really hard to look at a map and know what's going on. I mean, until I took a walk through North Sea-Tac Park, it was just another neighborhood backyard thing. And so not everybody has to do it, but I think it would be really good that staff can offer us a chance to look at the slopes, look at the proximity of the buildings to the thing. I got to see the buildings, the houses to the building. it's right up against it. I would never have seen that. So, I mean, it doesn't mean we wouldn't have built the thing. We could have had different mitigation, all that sort of stuff, but nothing like seeing it in just contour lines. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Fellman. And if I could just add one thing to that is that the NEPA process is being managed obviously by the FAA, or it's their process. And I've also heard many comments around just that process, people's ability to want the format to look different. And for the public's benefit, when it comes to the SEPA process, we are taking what we've heard. Our staff has heard your comments on format change, and that is going to be considered in the SEPA process, whether it will be more of a town hall format where a mic will be provided and people can go around and can provide their comments related to the SEPA process, and so that others can benefit from hearing their comments. And so that is well noted. We're taking all of those comments and considering it in the SEPA process that will be managed fully by the Port of Seattle. And comments that we've received thus far as a commission, we've taken it and heard what people had to say. For instance, wanting Federal Way, the Federal Way mayor reached out to us and had asked that we host one of the listening sessions in their city, and that was also done. And so, you know, this is not a perfect process, but our team is doing what they can to ensure that that they're doing the best that they can to manage this process and to hear the public's inputs around this. That is a priority for the commission. And so thank you, Commissioner Fellman, for attending one of those meetings and providing the feedback that you provided today. Commissioner Cho.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I just wanted to say I don't think we're meeting until first week of December, so happy Thanksgiving to all.
That's right. Happy Thanksgiving. Executive Director Metric, are there any closing comments today?
Thank you, Commissioners. I think that especially for your this iterative process, I said it already about the budget, but there's so many factors that we take into consideration in the development that I appreciate your appreciation for the staff, and because we are working in an uncertain world with revenues and costs are uncertain as we go forward and make our best guess, but it's all due to all that hard diligence and balancing of all those different factors that allows us to continue to move forward. And I appreciate your endorsement for the budget moving ahead, and then for your action on the other issues as well, especially the Maritime Blue relationship. Didn't say that for Joshua when he was here, as we said that he's been a great partner, and we're advancing that work as well. So appreciate all your forward leaning on all these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Executive Director Metric. Commissioners, hearing no further comments and having no further business, if there's no objections, we are adjourned, and the time is now 2:46 p.m. Thank you.